Giving away a MacBook Pro to one of you. It's brand new, it's still in the packaging. We know that a lot of people use Linux machines. Obviously, this is an open source conference, but we also know a lot of people use Macs. I'm old enough and have been around long enough to remember when very few people at an open source conference would use a Mac, and it was kind of like, whoa, Macs. But things have changed, right? And things have evolved over time, and now a lot of people use Macs and they implement and they utilize a lot of open source utilizing a Mac. So we are going to give away a brand new MacBook Pro today. We're going to do it randomly. We're going to, again, one of you, the fact that you're here, you're eligible to win. We're going to hand it to you, no strings attached, and we hope you enjoy the machine. On Monday, Tuesday, if you've seen the prizes, I don't know if you've seen the prize notification, but we are doing a bit of a gamification here on site, and we think that that's going to be a lot of fun. But you will just get points within your mobile app. So if you haven't downloaded the mobile app, I would really encourage you to do so. It's fun. Again, we tried to make it as engaging as possible. But anyway, you can download the mobile app. And if you attend the keynotes, you get points. If you attend the wrap-up session, you get points. And if you go around the convention center, and if you're just active, you can accumulate points pretty easily. So by all means, please download the app and take a look at the prizes that are available. More MacBook Pros, more Linux machines. System 76 is a great partner with us. We're giving away some really nice stuff. Our bar on what we determine and what we decide to give away is always what do we use and what would we want to use. What if I saw someone's list of prizes, would I think, wow, I can't believe they're even giving that away. That's really nice. I want that. That's always our bar. That's always, again, what we use as our guide. So I think if you take a look, some really, really nice stuff. And again, we want to reward you. We want to encourage you to be active while you're here. So I would encourage you to do that. So with all that said, Rikki, why don't you come on up? Let's get started. We're a little bit late getting started. I apologize, Rikki. It was my fault entirely. But I do want Rikki to kind of take over from here. I want to thank our speakers for being here. They're amazing. We are recording today. So this program will be available post-event. You can watch it from start to finish. We'll break the talks up also. And we are live streaming today. We are live streaming across social media, across Twitter, across LinkedIn, across Facebook. I don't think we're live streaming across Instagram, but we are live streaming across those first three platforms. So we didn't announce it. We knew there'd be a few bumps in the road. So we wanted to kind of work out those bumps before we go live with our live streaming and make the announcement tomorrow morning for the keynote block, if that makes sense. But just so you know, if you know of someone that was not able to be here, and they have access to our social media, or maybe they follow us, they've already been notified, but if they haven't, might want to ping them and let them know that they can catch the program across one of those social media platforms, okay? But thank you all very much. If you have any questions while you're on site, we're down at the registration area. See me personally. I will help you in any way that I can. And with all that said, thank you again. And Rikki, come on up.
Thank you. Thanks, Todd. All right. Welcome, everybody. I wanted to start by thanking Todd and the organizers and the volunteers and everybody running audio and video. Thank you so much. This event would not exist without you all. I'm happy to be here. If you heard creaking as I got up on stage, it's because I'm rusty. I haven't been to an event in a while. Is anyone else in the same boat as me, and this is their first conference since the before times? Okay, welcome. We're all in this together, you all. This is going to be good. It'll be good. Thank you for coming out. How many of you, this is your first conference ever? All right, welcome. This is a great event to be your first conference. The first time I came to Raleigh was, 6-7 years ago, something like that, when I had orientation at Red Hat when I was working at Red Hat. And then the second time I came to Raleigh was for an All Things Open event, my first All Things Open. I loved it, had a great experience. And then the third time I came to Raleigh was in a U-Haul from Texas, or Y'all Haul is what we called it there, I guess. And so I was enamored with Raleigh, the people here, the food. You got the weather here today, so you're getting the full experience if you're here from out of town. Welcome. Let's see, what else we have? Oh, I want to talk about the hallway track. I know that there are a ton of great speakers. The talks are awesome, and every session is going to be tempting. I know you probably have things that you want to get out of the event, and that's what you're focused on. But I want to really recommend the hallway track too, because some of the biggest magic of any in-person event happens in the hallway track. In fact, one of the things that has really helped me stay connected these past 20 months or so, are relationships I've built in the industry from seeing people at events and meeting people online, and these have led to personal friendships in addition to working relationships. And I hope that you all leave here with new connections and, of course, seeing people you haven't seen in a while, or seeing people that you've seen online and those little tiny pictures on Twitter or whatever, and then putting a real face to the emojis and hashtags that you've been following. And so when you're doing the hallway track, I was going to throw out one bit. It might not be such an issue now that people are doing more of spacing out, but a good pro tip for a hallway track is to always make sure, if you're talking in a group of people, to leave an opening. It's a Pac-Man rule, if you haven't heard of it, where you always make sure to leave a bit of an opening in your circle, your group of friends, to help invite people who are lurking around the edges. Often those will be people that this might be their first event, or they're from out of town, or they maybe are new in the industry, and that's just a great way to make people feel included. And to make new friends, that's what we're really here for. All right, and so I know we are running out of time, and I had this really long keynote. Just kidding, I did not have a long keynote, but I mostly wanted to welcome you all. I'm excited that you all are here. I'm excited to be here, and to keep us on time, I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Nigel, and I'm very excited about your talk, so come on up. Thank you for coming.
All right, so my first job out of school was as a developer advocate at IBM. I was a little over 2 years into my computer science degree, and I was going through one of the worst periods of my life. I had just transferred from my community college, which was in Oakland, California, to the University of California, San Diego, and yeah, just was not having a great time at all. Because of my involvement in the hackathon scene, thanks in large part to MLH, which is out there, and GitHub, who would take me around to go talk to students about starting their own hackathons or giving them support for the ones that they were at, the transition into the field of developer advocacy was pretty smooth. I didn't know it existed, and the more that I participated in these events, they're just like, hey, you would make a really great developer advocate. So when I decided to leave school, fortunately, this was it made a lot of sense. It was a pretty smooth transition. This photo was taken right before my first talk in New York City at Astor Place, which is where one of the IBM offices is. This is my friend Nick. Nick is one of the first people that I met when I worked at IBM. I chose this picture because I think it adequately sums up his personality. This is not one that I chose to make fun of him at all. This is actually the profile picture that he uses in the company-wide Slack workspace for IBM. He is a brilliant engineer, a very strange, and a very funny man, and one of my favorite people. And one thing I love about him is that he makes a lot of really cool projects that are throwaway. Like, he'll have an idea, hack on it, and then the repo will be sitting there. And it encouraged me to work on things and feel like a professional engineer as this college dropout who didn't know what I was doing. And there was one day that he commented on one of my pull requests that made me feel like I was crushing it. I thought that I know that this is right for me because this comment made me so excited. And the comment that he put on the, oh no, my slide's missing. Oh well, let's see, what do we do? Well, it's okay. The comment that he put on my slides, or on my PR, said LGTM. And it's the title of my talk, which is my title slide that's missing, which means to all of you, what does LGTM mean? Let's get that money. No? Just me. Okay. Hence my confusion. Nick, this person here, on my PR was like, yeah, man, that's so tight, let's get that money. And I'm like, I'm doing amazing. But yeah, as I soon realized after my manager also used the same phrase on my PR, I was like, wait, this probably means something different than I think it does. And I went and looked it up and realized, yeah, it actually means, for a lot of folks in tech, looks good to me. So this talk, I'm Nigel. I'm an open source community manager at VMware. And this talk makes a case for being more careful in our language and recognizing that just because we understand it or it looks good to us doesn't mean it looks good to everyone else. I'm not a linguist. I'm a person who loves language and who transitioned into tech from a few different industries. And I have some stories about when these assumptions go wrong and some propositions for how we can move forward with a more collective and inclusive vocabulary. As a takeaway from this presentation, I hope you leave with a better appreciation for etymology, some funny stories, and serious considerations for how we can better communicate. Acronyms are everywhere. We have gotten so used to them that some words we don't even realize are acronyms. How many people know that laser is an acronym, like a laser pointer? More than I thought. Scuba, also an acronym. Yeah, they become so much a part of our vernacular that we don't even recognize that other people don't understand what it is that we're referring to. When I was in the military, which was my first career, it felt like every other word was an acronym. Your AFSC, your job, SITREP, situation report, FUBAR, when things are really messed up, SNAFU, when FUBAR becomes what you kind of expect, OTF, you left when you weren't supposed to, or RTFM, which is a polite request to check the documentation. The list goes on and on and on. And the difficulty is that, some of them have made their way into the mainstream with some brilliant crossovers. This meme format made the rounds a few years ago. So if you've never seen this meme before, the way that it works is this is the NATO phonetic alphabet. Every letter has a word associated with it. So the way that you read this is that you take the first letter of every word and start to form the words along the way. Some of you are shaking your heads at me because you've already realized what that says. I apologize in advance. But some of these have made the rounds, and understanding them has this effect of helping us feel like we belong, like we're part of this in-group, like we know something, like almost clandestine like knowledge. But it also has the effect of excluding people that don't already understand. For those of you that didn't get it, that's a Rickroll there. There is far, far too much in the world to know. Every time I come to one of these conferences or have any sort of conversation, I realize just how much I don't know about things and just how passionate everyone is about what it is that they know. And we're doing ourselves and our passions a disservice by making things more difficult than they need to be. Some of the dangers are this exclusion that I've talked about. I have a really hard time feeling belonging in just about every space that I'm in. And feeling like there's so much that I don't understand, especially things that it seems like everybody else already knows, only makes that effect a lot harder. And if we want to make technology that solves problems for a large cross-section of society, the best way to do that is to have that cross-section of society represented in technology. And the way that we do that is meeting people where they are and giving them an on-ramp to understand what it is that we're trying to communicate. One of the other dangers is that you can get a lot of noise. I have a juvenile sense of humor. I'm very well aware of it. There are some things that I think are hilarious. So a few weeks ago, you may have all seen the senator talking to the VPs at Facebook, asking them to end Finstas. And in the comments of that, other people would say, you can ask me after what these things mean because it's not appropriate to say out loud. But they were asking about are they going to end BOFA next? And what happened was someone tagged this account underneath BOFA help or B of A help. Ask someone later if you don't know what that means. But you get a lot of you would get a lot of noise like this that could have been avoided by just looking up whatever your shorthand was and recognizing that that means something entirely different to a whole nother group of people who will drag you online and tag you as much as they can and create noise that makes it harder for you to do your job. So another case for staying away from these acronyms that don't immediately make sense, or to be more careful about what it is that you put out into the world. So what can we do? Tech is one of the worst offenders when it comes to explaining things in an approachable manner. I think it happens in two ways. There's a version where we make what we do seem much harder than it is, I'm not going to call you out. And there's a version where we set too high a level of assumed knowledge, which is like, it's done in good faith, but a lot of times we're not very clear about what it is you need to know coming into a situation. So where are people supposed to start? One great thing we can do is being a lot more intentional with our language and providing resources for learners. Another thing that I recommend a lot is spending more time mentoring, because when you see how someone starts to understand what it is you're teaching, when you see how people learn, you're able to more accurately create content that leads them on the journey that you want them to go. You see people that misunderstand things in a way that you would have never considered. One of the cool things that I've seen VMware do, which is where I work now, they have this dictionary called WTF, but like WDT, like what to define is what we call it. And it's full of all of these acronyms that you just type in an acronym and it prints out, this is what this thing means. And I would love to see something like that as for the larger industry, or maybe some tooling that someone can build that, you know, you highlight over an acronym and it gives you all these different definitions. And one other thing that I would encourage you all to do is to create or find content that can act as prerequisites for yours. I'm not saying you have to do it all yourself, but figure out who it is that whose voices you can elevate that will help get these things across as well. The effort that we spend creating more inclusion in our industry is never wasted. One of the areas that I've been focusing on lately with inclusive language is to do with mental health. I think that we use too often a lot of derogatory terms for mental health to describe things in tech that are difficult, like crazy or insane. And I would challenge you to look up those words and see if they're accurate representations of what you're trying to convey. We're brilliant people. We can choose more intelligent acronyms. We can choose better adjectives. And I hope that you all will take the time necessary to do that. Thank you so much. Have a good conference.
Okay, thank you for that talk. All right, I really appreciate that talk because I've been a long-time writer and editor in this industry, and a few months ago I actually tweeted, if you're in a call or a meeting and you don't know what an acronym is, go ahead and ask. No one else will know the answer, but you won't look dumb for asking. And it's just a running joke because if you've been in the industry for a short amount of time, you don't know what the acronym is because you haven't used it or heard it before. If you've been in a long time, you don't know what it is because you've used it for so long you forgot what it means. So thank you for that talk, it was great. And also I liked what you said at the end about using more precise language. I've been really trying to work on that myself. It's better to say less in a better way than to use words that are hurtful or cause misunderstandings, so thank you for that. So Demetris is coming up next, and I think we need a few minutes to swap out equipment, and then she will be talking about All In for Maintainers, creating an inclusive culture within communities.
Hello, everyone. I am Demetris Cheatham, and I am the Senior Director for Diversity and Inclusion Strategy at GitHub. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you all about some amazing work we are doing with our corporate partners, foundations, nonprofit organizations, universities, and many of you here across the open source ecosystem. Today, I'm going to share a few things that we've learned so far about maintainers. Maintainers. Why maintainers? Well, after talking to so many people over the course of the past few months, here's what we've been hearing repeatedly. Inclusion happens at the community level. Whether someone feels welcome into open source, it really is dependent on those day-to-day interactions that they're having, those conversations online, those async communications, responses or lack thereof to pull requests and questions and issues and comments, not to mention those interactions that happen at events, whether virtual or in person. That's the place where inclusion or exclusion really happens. And what we've also heard is that the maintainer of that community, it really is there with that maintainer that drives the tone of inclusion in a community. You see, for those that may not be as familiar with open source communities, think of your maintainer to your community as a manager to a team in an organization or in a company. So they are the ones that have that direct influence on what's going on within that team or within that community. So we decided to really understand what the maintainers' experiences are, what their stories are, what's working, what's not working, what's some of the challenges that they're seeing with advancing diversity and inclusion within their communities. And we want to know what we can do to help them drive this even further. So with that, we've embarked on a maintainers listening tour. And one of my slides disappeared. So with the maintainers listening tour, this is a series of individual interviews, focus groups, as well as an async process for maintainers to provide information to us online. And so I have to put in a little bit of a shameless plug here. If you're at All Things Open, and even if you're online, we're going to be hosting a focus group tomorrow. So please make sure you check out your agenda and join us there. So let's talk about what we're seeing as far as the maintainers listening tour so far. That's what I'm going to share with you today. 6 things that we've actually been surprised about. So I want to say this. I'm sharing these with you. It's very preliminary. We're about halfway through the listening tour, so they're not absolute. We just want to hear if these things resonate with you. If you find something different, it might be a little bit more nuanced, so don't at me on this right now. Or if you do at me, just come at me so we can just have more of a dialogue. So the first thing that we've learned is about sponsored hackathons and community programs. So this is a classic case of intent versus impact. The intent of these programs is to provide opportunities for people who may be new to open source for them to do some meaningful contributions to communities. But what we've heard from maintainers is that these programs are a double-edged sword. Sometimes, and oftentimes, you'll have a company or organization that will sponsor these hackathons, and then all of a sudden you'll have tons of contributors, new contributors, that will descend on these communities. And it will then create a lot of work for these maintainers, where these maintainers then have to close out these requests, respond to these requests, and sometimes these aren't even the critical tasks that they would like to be focused on. And so, again, this is what maintainers are saying. But this also creates a negative impact for those contributors that are part of these hackathons. Because if maintainers are really busy and it takes them a long time to respond to these requests and to really go through them, then these contributors are feeling like they're being ignored. They're invisible. And what we've learned is that that's one of the #1 ways where people do not feel included in open source. They don't feel welcome when they're making these pull requests, when they're asking questions, and no one responds. So you have that kind of negative interaction there. Another intent of these programs is to create a pathway for students to really contribute and, again, make meaningful contributions. But what we heard from maintainers is that a lot of the things that these contributors are doing aren't those critical tasks that they really need help with. And so they want to perhaps have a way that people know what those critical tasks are. There was one maintainer, she said, if there was a perfect world, if I had my wish list, those students and those participants would really come and help us work on those things that we need done to advance inclusion within our communities. They want them to help on things like making their code more inclusive, dealing with some of those non-inclusive terminology. They were like, that's where they would like to see a lot of those paid contributions. I want to make sure that you all do not leave here thinking that those programs are bad. As a matter of fact, they're excellent programmers. The maintainer said that. But we want you to think about it as a yes and. Yes, those programs are amazing, and we like to have greater partnership and collaboration. So if you are an organization or a company that sponsors these events, maybe work with the communities and those maintainers to understand What are those critical tasks that they need done? Have a targeted list of those communities that really are welcoming these students and these contributors that have the time and the bandwidth to respond. Because again, those paid contributors and that direct technical support, that's exactly what those communities said that they would love to see in those maintainers. Number 2, cross-community collaboration. This is something that maintainers really said that they hadn't thought about, but they can't figure out why they aren't doing this. I'll give you a prime example. We had a focus group a couple of weeks ago, and one of the smaller communities, they said, hey, we had this project that we were doing where it's about 80% complete. We were removing the dead names from our code, but the contributor that was working on it, they're no longer able to complete that project. As soon as that maintainer got it out of their mouths, another maintainer from a larger, more well-sourced community said, wait a minute, we've already done that. We had a group that worked on this for us. If you're 80% complete, we're gonna send folks over there and we're gonna do that for you. Consider it done. And in that moment, all of us started wondering, our projects collaborate with each other on code. Why don't we collaborate with each other on inclusion? It was just like a duh moment. Like, we should be sharing resources. We should be sharing contributors. We should be not only just documenting what we've done to increase inclusion, but we also should be lending that direct technical support where it's available. And so we just started seeing more and more maintainers working together now. So that's something that we've been really, really pleased to see and we're gonna work on, that cross-community collaboration. Number 3, what exactly are we trying to solve? So you always hear about this thing, and I actually hate when people are saying, like, what problem are we trying to solve? This is my own soapbox. I'm like, diversity and inclusion isn't a problem to be solved in the first place, right? But we found that we were thinking one way, that this is what we need to do. And throughout this maintainers listening tour, we found a few other things that's actually happening. So here's what we first started thinking, that communities need codes of conduct. You read so many research papers, so many surveys say, yes, that's one of the critical things that we need. Well, maintainers started telling us, we actually got our code of conduct. It's like most communities, especially that are part of those larger organizations, they already have code of conducts. What they really need are enforced code of conducts, as well as the training for when a community receives a code of conduct violation. Right now, if there's a code of conduct report, it goes to info at whatever website or email address. The maintainer or the group gets it, and they're like, we look at it and say, how do we deal with this now? They have no idea. They haven't been trained in intervention, de-escalation techniques, and actually some of them said that they look at these reports and are like, they don't even see the issue. They're not even sure what the issue is. So they were like, we got our code of conduct. We need help with that next step, with how to enforce our code of conduct and what's the appropriate process for that. So that's something that we're going to be looking into. They also said we need to figure out how to turn new contributors into repeat contributors. That's what we were thinking. Like, hey, you have these folks that are coming to these communities, but then they're like, something's happening, and then they leave. So we were like, we got to figure out how to get them to stay there. Well, maintainers said, we actually don't need them to stay there. That usually when someone comes into our community or into our project, it's because they've been working on something with our code and they found some type of bug or issue or security breach, and they come for the specific purpose to solve that thing. And once they worked on it and solved it, they're gone. And so really, they said it's only about the number that was thrown out there, like less than 5% of new contributors per year, that they actually want to stay in their community. They need help with identifying who those contributors are, that's that 5% that they can mentor and help them get on a path to community leadership. So they said we don't want widespread projects to start and keep these large numbers of contributors to our community. We're okay with them leaving. We need for you to help us identify those that are primed for community leadership. Speaking of community leadership, That's number 4. So we kicked off an open source diversity, equity, and inclusion survey with the Linux Foundation as part of this initiative. And so we asked the question, do you agree with this statement? There is a clear process to become a leader or maintainer in an open source project. Well, here's what our maintainers said. 56% of them said that they agree with this statement. So what did everybody else say that's not a maintainer? Only 36% said that. So if you're a maintainer, sure, there's a process because I became a maintainer. But if you're not a maintainer, it's very likely you have no clue how to become a maintainer. So we have to work on that and solve for that as well. And how do you solve for that? Through documentation. And that's the number 5 thing that we've learned. So let's see what that survey said around documentation. Open source projects I work on have process documentation in addition to technical documentation. This is the process documentation that talks about all those things that are critical to the success of a community, but not the actual code piece of it. And so let's see, maintainers said, oh, we got this. We got that process documentation. 72% agreed with that statement. Let's see what everybody else said. Less than half. So maintainers, there's a perception versus reality thing here. So you might be thinking that you have this documentation, but everyone else is saying that it doesn't exist. So we have to work on that as well. Documentation is critically important, that process documentation. This is where all these important things happen. Your path to leadership. How do you become a new contributor or new to a community, or you've been contributing to a community and you're ready to advance? This sets the stage for that. How you can contribute. What we've heard from maintainers and new contributors alike is that sometimes they feel that the only way that they can contribute to a community is if they code. And if you're not an experienced coder, you're not welcome in that community. Well, maintainers said, no, there's tons of tasks that we need done. Well, you have to document them so that people know what they are. And then once you come into a new community, you have to look for that documentation so that you're contributing meaningfully at the right level. Make sure you document those critical tasks that need to get done. Remember I talked about the hackathons a little bit earlier? If you want those programs to focus on those critical tasks, you need to let people know what they are, and that's in that documentation. This next one is my favorite, the don't peek around the corner list. I call this the junk drawer list, like the junk drawer you have in your home. You know it's a mess, and this code in your community and your project is janky. You don't want anybody to touch it. You're going to get to it one day, but right now you don't need anybody touching it, because if you start touching it, it will unravel a whole bunch of stuff that's going to cause a lot of work for folks. And so they're like, don't touch that. Document that so that someone doesn't come into your community and into your project and starts fooling around in your junk drawer. And then this final one, which when I've talked to maintainers, they said that if you were to prioritize these, this probably needs to be number 1. Document clarity around the vision and goals of your community. Is this a short-term project? Is this a long-term project? Is this something that was just created for a specific purpose for a specific organization that you might not want to grow into a community? There are all sorts of reasons why people create things under open source licenses. Becoming a community might not be one of them. Maintainers, if this is the case, just document it and let us know so that we don't be trying to, jump in and get in there in your community, and that's really not what your intent is. So make sure you have clarity around your vision and goals. And finally, the number 6 thing that we've learned, all of the open source maintainers said that they needed to do a better job of expanding their personal networks. So what we've heard from maintainers is that, yes, they have these amazing events that are meant to drive inclusion. And then when we asked them, well, how do you get the word out about events? They were like, oh, we post it on LinkedIn and Twitter. Well, what does your network look like? It looks like me. Everybody looks like me in my network. So you're basically inviting the same people that are similarly situated over and over. Another maintainer had like this thought during the interview. They were like, you know what? All of the open source communities that I started, it was a result of me and my friends, sometimes family members, were sitting around and we decided to start a community together. So yeah, all of us are similarly situated, and then we'll go and get our friends who look like us, and they'll go get their friends who look like us, and then we have this very non-diverse community. So it started to have me thinking, and I was thinking about this, and then look what popped up on Twitter. Are we creating communities, or are we creating cliques? Asking for a friend. And so maintainer said, yep, that's what we're doing. We're creating cliques. We're creating a lot of extracurricular activities, and we want to hang around with the people that are like us. But we're not serious about advancing inclusion if we don't do that, if we don't expand our networks. Like, we have to start with our personal networks before we start this artificial thing of creating this open source project that's diverse. So again, those are just 6 interesting things that we've learned. We picked up, again, not absolute. We're halfway through the Maintainers Listening Tour. But now that we're learning about these things, what are we going to do about it? Well, this is where we've created an open source community called All In. All In is dedicated to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in open source by focusing on access, community, equity, and data. Have to do another shameless plug. I promise you, I think I got one more. Tomorrow, the keynote that I'll be delivering is more on All In. So make sure you tune in to that so I can tell you about the amazing work we're doing in addition to All In for maintainers. All In for maintainers will have a 12-month pilot. But we haven't decided what the pilot is going to be yet, because one of the things that we wanted to do was design All In for maintainers with maintainers, not for maintainers. And so that's why we're doing the Maintainers Listening Tour and a whole host of other things. But here's what we're thinking. We want to make sure that we have inclusive development for community leaders. What does unconscious bias training look like for community leaders, not just generic unconscious bias? We want to start looking at something like the Chaos Project, and I see a lot of you representing Chaos here, that has the badging for events. What would it look like if we had a badge for communities, for maintainers, for projects who are not just saying they're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but are actually doing the work? We want to display an all-in badge on their profiles. Free access to tools that advance inclusion. Whether you're talking about accessibility audits, inclusive naming, scans, your code scans, code of conduct analysis, these tools should be in the hands of everybody, but it can't be cost prohibitive. We've talked about inclusive language and code scans, accessibility audits, and the code of conduct analysis. Again, this is what maintainers said that they would love to see, and we're building into this program. Again, this is what we're thinking. What we need is help from all of you to help us build out this program. So here's where you can get involved. Go to our website, allinopensource.com. There's a big circle about halfway down that says Maintainers Listening Tour. Click there. If you are a maintainer, or if you're someone that has a reaction, good or bad, to anything that I've shared today, or if this is spurred on new ideas, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you what you would like to see in a program like this. But again, this is your invitation to not only join me tomorrow, but right here today, please join us as we open source diversity and inclusion. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome to my talk. Let me introduce y'all to y'all. My name is Mason Egger, and I am a senior developer advocate at DigitalOcean. I am currently super jealous of everyone who is there right now in person. Really wish I was able to make it out this year, but just didn't play out right for me this time. Hopefully next year I'll get to see everyone in person. But currently I am coming to you live from roughly the Austin, Texas area. So this talk, as you can tell, is going to be a little bit Southern, and we're going to talk a little bit about the word y'all. So I'm from the state of Texas, and a lot of people, when they tend to think of Texas, they think big, and this tends to be a picture that people have in their mind of how big Texas really is. It seems to be all over the internet. It's all over TikTok right now. As someone who has lived in Texas their entire life, I can tell you that this is not an accurate image. A more accurate image would be this one. We are roughly 2 times the size of Jupiter, especially whenever you try to drive outside of the state. But of all the things that I'm going to talk about today, this will be the last of the Texas jokes, hopefully. But what I'm going to talk about today is a word or a phrase that is very common in Texas and very common in the South in general, and that is the word y'all. And I'm going to be specifically talking today about how y'all can be used to make your documentation, to make your communities, to make everything more inclusive. So we have a need currently, I would say in tech, for more inclusive language. So how many people in the room, go ahead and raise your hand. I can't see you, but you can pretend that I can see you, have heard a video or seen a presentation start off with the phrase, "Hey guys," or "How's it going guys," or something along those lines, where they're using a gendered term like such as guys. I can't see you, but I would assume there's probably a handful of people who have raised their hand. If not, hopefully a majority, because it seems like every YouTube video I watch tends to be that way. And while this is a popular way of greeting a group of individuals, it is not technically an inclusive one. It is not a gender neutral greeting, and it may not be seen as completely welcoming to certain groups. I know this has been a big topic lately. Like, what do we move to? How do we get to a more inclusive language and more gender neutral greeting? And boy, do I have an answer for you. Oops, didn't mean to say boy there, but we can go with, inclusive language here is really important in our communities. I would say that it's something that we definitely need a lot more of. It makes your communities more inclusive. It allows for you to ensure that people are feeling welcomed and safe, and that's what we really want. If you want much more in-depth specific examples, come see my Write Docs Devs Love talk tomorrow. I'm going to be going a lot deeper into some of these specific things. But for now, for this talk, we're going to be talking about the word y'all. And specifically, y'all, which is the plural form of you. So it's always been interesting to me, as someone who is an English native speaker first, that we really don't have a second person plural that's really prevalent throughout the entire English vernacular. So many different languages have a plural form of the second person personal pronoun. So as someone who grew up in Texas, who took language courses in class, I took a lot of Spanish courses, and the Spanish language itself has this kind of second person pronoun, plural second person pronoun, which is the vosotros or the ustedes, depending on which dialect you're speaking, Spain or Latin American. But English itself doesn't really have it anymore. So it turns out we actually did have a plural form of you in the past. It was really prevalent in the Middle Ages. So in the Middle Ages, the word thou was the singular version of what we would use today as you. So if I was say something like point at a singular person and say thou, that is the you. And then we had the word ye, which was a plural version of thou, that could include a group of people in the second person. However, as all things in language change, as dialects change and just language evolves, it's just the nature of language, this sort of plural form of use has slowly faded away. So how did we get the word y'all? Where did it come from? And it actually came from a handful of different places. In the Scottish dialect, there actually was the phrase ye all. So this was like where ye could be used in the Middle Ages as a plural form of you. Ye all was used in the Scottish dialect and was sometimes, used in the Americas. Whenever all the Scottish immigrants came to America, it got shortened to the word y'all. So that's one of the places that it came from, but it's actually, I don't think that is considered one of the most widely known use of it. Like there are some people that definitely brought it over from Scotland, but I think the more prevalent version of this and where it came from came out of the American South, specifically from the enslaved African American population and their descendants within the South. They were speaking this language and they brought it along and started using it, and it just eventually became part of the colloquial South and is what is considered a Southern term. So it definitely does have a lot of its origins within the southern part of the United States. So how do you use the word y'all? It's actually relatively simple. Y'all equals you all. There, that's all. So instead of saying like one person is you, and then everyone in this room collectively in front of me would be y'all. One of the ways you could say a greeting is you could say howdy y'all. That's a really southern way, and if you've ever been to Texas A&M University, that's their formal greeting of the university. It can refer to an entire group of people. So everyone in this audience, I could go out and say, hello y'all, or how are y'all doing today? But it could refer to a subgroup of people. I'm going to pretend that there's a left, center, and right stage section of the audience, usually with aisles in the middle. And maybe everyone over to my right, which would be left in mirrored camera. This group over here, this would be, I could refer to this smaller subgroup also as y'all. So, y'all, and then there could be 3 different groups of y'all, which, as you can see, can get a little bit confusing. One of the other things that it allows you to do is it allows you to have possessive. So you can have the apostrophe S at the end to make y'all possessive. So if everybody, say in this right-hand side to me, that I'm imagining, was standing, I could say, could everyone please take y'all's seats? And you could use it in that form. And then what do we do now, though, if we have, if I'm referring to this group to the right as y'all, but now I have all y'all, which is everyone in the room. Doesn't necessarily have to be done that way, but it can be done that way. So if I'm using it to describe a subgroup, so over here, so pretend the people to my right, it's y'all, and then I want to talk to everyone in the room, I could potentially say all y'all. But that's just one of the ways. It may not be the most grammatically correct, I will admit, but it's funny and it makes me laugh. And if you've ever been to any of the southern parts of the United States, it's definitely a phrase or a terminology that you've heard before. And we can do a couple of other things with y'all, is that we can have contractions, which is fun. So for those of you that aren't familiar with contractions, or we use them every day, but you may not know the definition of them. A contraction is a shortened version of a word in spoken and written forms that basically omits letters and adds an apostrophe in. So y'all is already a contraction. You all, we remove the OU, put the apostrophe there, and we get y'all. Words like can't, don't, won't, it's, these are all singular contractions, which means it removes one singular portion of it. But we do sometimes in English have what are known as double contractions. They're extraordinarily rare and they don't really show up as much, but whenever you get into the southern dialects and you're using y'all, it shows up a lot. So there are a lot of different suffix y'all contractions. So you could say something like y'all'd, which adds the D at the end, and it's you all would. You can say y'all, which is really fun to have to enunciate that double L there, and it's you all will. There's y'aller, which I'm laughing at myself just saying these out loud. These are things that I say in my personal life. Like I guarantee you I use these with like my family and friends and stuff, but it's not anything I think I've ever given a presentation on. So you all are, and then there's y'all, which is you all have, or something along those lines. And then there are the ways that we can make these questions. So we can use prefix and add the D at the front, so y'all, which would be do you all or did you all, depending on the context. You'd have to really know the context there of the opportunity, of the context of the conversation at that point. So a lot of people are like, well, are we taking this too far? I don't know. Are we? We do have triple contractions. So the one that I definitely hear used the most would be y'all'd, which is you all would have. So we definitely have that, and it's just as odd as it sounds, but I definitely hear it in my day-to-day. We can combine multiple contractions into another contraction. So we have y'all, which is you all, and then there's also the very popular word in the English language, ain't, which is are not. And you can actually do some really weird, like contractions and bring them together. And that's how you end up getting the word yanked, which is you all are not. And it's the combination of two different contractions. So the question is, are we taking this too far? Maybe. The most ridiculous one I've ever seen is this one, which I don't even know if I can say, but I'm going to make the attempt. Yaldiv if I'd've, which basically is you all would have if I would have. I will say I've never actually heard this one used in passing conversation, but I would not put it past the fact that it's there. So in conclusion of this hopefully funny talk, hopefully I made you laugh, using inclusive language is an easy thing to change and implement into your project. It's not too much of a stretch to just, use these gender neutral terms. Y'all here being one of the joke, but it is a very valuable one to use. It makes everyone feel more welcoming within your community. I would definitely do recommend using y'all. I've used it in my writings and in my personal documentations before. Never really got anything about it. I will say some of the words that I did present in this presentation, especially as towards the end, as it got more and more ridiculous, they may not be as practical, especially for people who don't speak English as a first language, or people who speak it for English as a second language. I speak English as a first language, and I get lost in some of these sometimes. So it was, kind of a joke, but I would definitely recommend using y'all. It's a great word. It's a great intro. It's how I start all of my talks. I say, hey, y'all, or how are y'all doing? I know it sometimes has a little bit of the stigmatization of, the South and, maybe not being as educated. It doesn't sound, sometimes I've heard people say, it doesn't sound as like an educated term, which I don't agree with. So I hope you had fun. I hope you liked this presentation. Thank you for having me here. I hope that you will come by and see my next talk tomorrow. If you have any questions for me, you can tweet me at Twitter, email me at mason@digitalocean.com. And this is an actual sign at my favorite state park in the state of Texas that says, y'all come back. And I hope you all come back for my next talk and continue to enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much and have a great day.
All right, thank you to Mason for that talk. I'm actually from the Kansas City area originally, but my family's from farming communities, so y'all sounded very familiar to me when I moved here. But I liked his talk. I thought that was great, and we should use y'all more. It's cozy and convenient. Okay, so the next talk will also be virtual. David Grizzanti will be joining us from Comcast to talk about adopting open source practices to build more inclusive products and services. And he will be on shortly.
Hey, everybody. Sorry, it took me a second. As Mason said, I wish I was there in person with everybody to experience everything Raleigh has to offer. I've been to the conference a few times in the past and look forward to returning. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about open source practices and the concept of inner source to build more inclusive products. So my name is Dave Grizzanti. I am a senior principal engineer at Comcast, coming to you live from sunny Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So a little bit of my background, I've been an engineer for about 15 years, interested in engineering leadership and distributed systems. And I've recently become more interested in the intersection of open source communities and how we can use open source practices to build more diverse and inclusive working environments. So if everybody could think for a second, how diverse are your engineering teams? And think about not necessarily your whole company, but the specific teams that you work on. And I think we tend to work on small teams, especially in some companies nowadays, like the concept of a 2-pizza team. And with that, it's hard to necessarily get a broad, diverse team when our teams are necessarily small. And our tech trends and the way we build products today tend to reflect the people who are on those teams. Their perspectives and their experiences shape how our products are designed and built. And this can be from anything from a smart speaker to things like smart cities. So it's important that we think about how we can expand and focus more on building more inclusive products, even with small teams. Over the last probably year and a half, a lot of companies have focused on improving diversity, but really it takes time, especially when you want to see diversity at the highest levels of the company or in your engineering leaderships. And we also tend to blame the concept of the pipeline problem, lack of diverse folks in the pipeline. But that theory has been largely debunked. And in reality, we have biases in our hiring process. So we need to look at fixing our job descriptions, looking for talent in other locations, and really fixing our hiring processes. But this will take a while, and companies want to build more accessible and more inclusive products now. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do now to maybe create more inclusive products with the existing teams that you have. So how about we take this idea of looking at wisdom of the crowd, or looking at the resources that you have within your entire company, maybe not just within your individual teams. So All Things Open, the conference, is a lot about open source, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, but some people may not be familiar with this concept of inner source. And open source and inner source are not necessarily the same thing, though they borrow a lot of concepts from each other. So let's dig into this idea of inner source a little bit more. So inner source is the use of open source best practices and the establishment of an open source culture, but within your organization. So your company may continue to develop proprietary software, but you can open the work between developers and teams internally. So sometimes people consider this like open source within the firewall. So simple things that you can do, like make your code public, meaning anybody can contribute. So code, documentation, testing. And when I say public, I mean public within your company. So for example, I work at Comcast. We have all of our source code in a single Git source control system, but the large majority of our code in those repositories is public, meaning that I can look at other teams' code. People outside the company can't, but I can see all those repositories. So how would this type of thing help with building inclusive products? Well, anyone in the company can help. If I have some free time, I can look at other projects, but projects can also gather volunteers from other teams or borrow engineers that may be able to help in certain areas that your team may be lacking in. So design, accessibility, et cetera. And teams can have incentives similar to open source projects for helping out, and the company can have a culture of celebrating contributions within the company. So what are some of the benefits that we see with open source or inner source? These are similar to benefits we see with open source projects. So documentation. Code is better documented, both in comments and less formally in discussions. So the more people looking at projects that you have internally, using them or just poking around, might contribute documentation fixes or see issues with your documentation and suggest fixes for you. Next, maybe code reuse. So code is more discoverable, projects are more discoverable. One of the big things that we do inside Comcast is make reusable modules for Terraform. So if I write a Terraform module for building something that's specific to the company, and this is on our Git repos, another team can take advantage of that because we're sharing this code, similar to being in the open source world, but for everybody across the company. Collaboration. So this will help facilitate collaboration between teams as you kind of meet people in the company. Obviously, this is a lot different depending on if you have a huge company or a small company. But helping work on code helps with collaboration besides just simple networking or meet and greets. And the last thing is culture. So silos are broken down, happiness is improved. And I think being able to work on open source is seen as a big factor for people who will take a job at a certain company. But being able to work on inner source projects is also something that employees might like to do because they get to work on different languages, different projects, but you're still retaining talent and people are working inside the same company. So how can you go about adopting some of these inner source practices? What kind of things would you look at to take into account? So think about everybody can contribute. People tend to think of only engineers as people that can contribute to open source projects or contribute code in general, but their contributions can be things outside of code. They can be bug fixes, reports, copy edits, or even people using your software and giving you opinions about things that you may be lacking in the accessibility or inclusion space. So welcome everybody. put this in your READMEs that anybody can help improve. Make it very easy for people to see how to make improvements or contribute back fixes. Second is establish maintainer roles. And this, again, doesn't have to necessarily be the engineer in charge of the project. It can be product managers, lead developers, or other key decision makers that are kind of elevated to manage these contributions coming in from the outside. And lastly, standardized tools and open projects. So I mentioned that at my company, we use a single Git server to manage all of our projects. So that's one thing that would help, use a single platform so that it's easy for people to discover projects to contribute to, or find other people that they may be able to gather help from for their own project. So we talked a lot about inner source, what it is, some of the benefits and how to adopt it. But let's take a pause for a second and reflect on what we talked about so far. So following inner source can help more folks get involved, raise awareness of your project, maybe break down silos and give more folks the ability to contribute to more projects across the company. We're looking to open source practices for guidance and drawing on people with expertise in areas you need across the company. But inner source alone isn't going to fix your inclusion or accessibility problem in your software. It'll help to get more folks involved, but really we need some guidelines along with these inner source practices to follow to really make a difference. So what are some guidelines we can follow? So while I was doing research for this talk and just my general interest, I read a book by Kat Holmes called Mismatch, How Inclusion Shapes Design. And this is a quote from the book that she mentioned, which is, designing for inclusion begins with recognizing exclusion. So once you've recognized and accepted that exclusion occurs, you can see that this is a cycle. And habits that lead to exclusion, can include using only your team's abilities. So we want to look at a few ways to eliminate folks feeling excluded during, while you're developing your software, but also as people use the software. So language matters. We know a little about using inclusive language. Mason's talk before mine mentioned using y'all, which I don't mention that specifically, but that's a very good example of something that would be more inclusive. So software terminology update-wise, one of the things that I know has become pretty popular that is still taking longer than I thought to change was renaming master branch domain, deprecating terminology. So instead of using whitelist and blacklist, use allowed or blocked. Same for black box testing, open, closed, and master machine nodes become controller. And on the topic of gender inclusive language, the Linguistic Society of America defines inclusive language as language that acknowledges diversity, conveys respect to all people, sensitive differences, and promote equal opportunities. So generally, we've become accustomed to not to gender specific pronouns. So the use of guys, that is not great to use. So y'all is a good replacement, as Mason mentioned, but just generally being more aware that using gender neutral terminology is better. I tend to use folks a lot, which can get overused. So just try to mix it up, but just be aware. Using preferred pronouns is another great example. So this is much about making your coworkers and peers feel inclusive. This is about making sure your documentation and examples use proper pronouns. And using an individual's correct pronouns in the workplace is a powerful affirmation of self for gender and gender nonconforming individuals. Validates one's identity and encourages authenticity. So I didn't actually do this at the beginning of my talk, and I did have a note to say that, but to introduce yourself with your pronouns to make folks feel more comfortable sharing, even if it's not something that you think would apply to you necessarily. The more people that do it and make it seem like a normal practice, the more it will become standard. So maybe put pronouns in your email signature, things like that. My profile on our Slack internally has my pronouns on it. And I have some references at the end I'll share for more on this. And then lastly, let's talk about building some practices within your organization. So design with excluded and diverse communities, not for them. So this is something that we tend to do is, we're going to make this product and we're assuming what these communities need. So make sure to involve them if you can. Maybe you're building a product for a community and you can involve folks from the community to help you get feedback or build the product. maybe consider compensating them if that's something that your company can offer, or building some kind of community with the members to help. Foster belonging through representation. So reflect on whether or not your product privileges or tokenizes certain communities or cultures as a starting point, and avoid system defaults that make assumptions about people's identities or force them to categorize themselves while they're using it. Next, strengthen culture, training, and processes within your organization. So staff diverse teams if possible, and support them through tools and processes that scale inclusion. This could look like continuous education and training, such as bias busting linters, or plugins that offer alternative language proposals. So one of the common ways I've seen this in something like Slack is if somebody says a term that doesn't reflect something your company is looking to include, it'll respond back. So if you say, hey guys, Slack will say like, try to use a more gender neutral pronoun. Establish accountability within the organization. So performance review time or measurable inclusion goals as you build your products and plans for product teams. And normalize inclusion at a system level. So not just your engineering teams, but really the leaders need to make an example of this by highlighting case studies of inclusion inside the organization and showing that teams are making an effort to do a better job at this. So let's start to wrap up a bit. So acting together is something that we all can do. So some of the practices we looked at were adopting inner source within your organization, learn from examples in the open source communities, take those back internally with the products you build. Designing for inclusion starts with recognizing exclusion, use inclusive language, and build with excluded individuals and communities, not for them. So I've got a slide here with some resources, this one, the next one. So this is a resource for the Inner Source Commons, which is doing a lot of great work in the space of inner source. They have community calls and conferences. They're really inviting Slack channel if you're looking for more references of either how to get involved with inner source or how to adopt it within your company. They have some patterns you can follow, things like that. And then lastly, this is a list of resources and references that I used while building this talk. Inclusive language guide from Northwestern, pronoun guide from Out and Equal, a study on the GitHub team gender from GitHub teams that I didn't go into specifically, but it's worth looking at, and a few others. And that's it from me. Thanks, everybody. I included my Twitter handle in here if you have any questions or want to chat or learn more about any of these topics.
All right, looks like we're about at time, so we should be thinking about getting started again. I wanted to remind everybody that we are going to have a group moderated discussion around 4:15 today. So as you're seeing the speakers talk and thinking about the topics, if you have questions, that would be a great time to ask them later today. And so up next we will have Matt and his co-presenter Ruth will be dialing in and joining him over Zoom, and they'll be talking about chaos, diversity, equity, and inclusion, open source badging initiative.
So we are starting the talk about the open source badging initiative for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am Matt Cantu Snell. I go by they, them pronouns. And do we want to bring in Ruth here? Just ask her to introduce herself at first, and I can go ahead and keep going from there.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Ruth Ikegah from Nigeria, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm happy to be making this presentation with Matt, and yeah, excited to tell you more about badging and the process of badging.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and present, if you let me know when Ruth is in, and on the audio, and then I'll take the presentation until then. So we're talking about badging initiative. You may want to know more about the aspects of badging initiatives that the context that we're working in here. So badging in open source really boils down to virtual emblems for something that's done well in a certain aspect. So in this case, we're working with events. It's also been done for projects, individuals, organizations, and groups. So we have, an important aspect of it is that they're effective systems of reward. They've been proven to be very effective in the past, and some of those example projects would be like the CII Core Infrastructure Initiative, the IEEE SA Open, which has a new badging initiative, and Black Duck Security. So we have a new badging initiative, or a relatively new badging initiative at this point that we built out of the CHAOSS project. I'll talk a little bit about CHAOSS here. So it was founded in 2017 in the Open Source Summit North America. It's based where I like to work and study at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And it's focused on, so we like to think of it as if you'd like to know more about how your project is doing, how it can improve, the maturity of your project, and all kinds of aspects of your project. We have the CHAOSS project for that. We provide metrics that help you measure the health of a project. And we have many working groups. My favorite is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group. We get a lot of things moved forward as far as awareness goes for diversity, equity, and inclusion in open source, primarily in projects and events. And it really comes down to that it's friendly people doing what they can to improve DEI. So, moving forward from the CHAOSS project, we wanted to build a way to apply our badging metrics. We have all these, our DEI metrics, so we have all these metrics. We want to come to a conclusion where we are able to bring them to the real world. Our first question, once we had the metrics that we needed, were how do we do more with our metrics? So we kind of thought, how can we apply these in the real world? And that refined down to how do we move from awareness to application? So there is a lot of awareness in the DEI space right now. There are a lot of people that know what the problem is and are aware of how it's going now. So what we asked ourselves was, how are we going to put this out in a way that people can use it, we can use it, and improve DEI from that aspect? And our question that we came down to was, how the heck are we going to accomplish this? It really turned into a situation where we had a lot of ideas, and we had to boil them down. We had to figure out what the idea that's working for us is. So, one second, we lost the slides here. I'll talk about it a little bit as we go. The badging initiative kind of came to be as an idea through the CHAOSS project that when we brought it to life, it was launched in September 2020. But launched is kind of a loaded term. We had a Google Summer of Code project with two lovely people that were really helpful and instrumental in getting this launched to where it is. And they both still contribute to the project in some capacity as well. We focused on open source events, so we provide badges to events with event organizers at the forefront there. And we implemented a peer review system that's based on the Journal of Open Source Software system for open and transparent peer review. That's really important because everybody's got to have a starting point. Every project, every initiative has to have a starting point, and that's where we started. And at this point, over 40 different events have earned badges for diversity, equity, and inclusion through the CHAOSS DEI badging initiative. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the process works. So when you first begin, an event organizer fills out an application on the CHAOSS website. If you ever want to know the CHAOSS website, I have more links here soon, but it's chaoss.community. 2 reviewers are assigned on a GitHub issue. So once you fill out the web application, it gets transferred to GitHub where it's turned into an issue, and we use GitHub issue tracking to manage our applications. And then the reviewers have a review checklist of all the metrics that we have applied to events, and they ask questions. They work with the applicant, and it's really a friendly process that we go through to get information from the applicant to the reviewer to the reviewer to the checklist, and eventually a maintainer, which in some cases is me, we generate a badge for the organizer using a badging bot. That GitHub bot is, it calculates all of the checkboxes that are checked and says what % of those are checked. And then the organizer accepts the badge. They can ask for more help. They can say, I'm not finished yet, and that's totally okay. And once that badge is implemented, we ask for, we put it on the README. We give them high-res versions. We give them everything they can that they can, that if they'd like to put it on their website, or kind of, if they want to talk about it. And this is where it comes to why it matters, why it's important to us that we have this badging initiative and what impact it may be having. So I'm happy to tell you the DEI components that really need attention in the open source space. The parts of diversity, equity, and inclusion in events that need the attention are going to get that attention through the DEI badging initiative. We're always adding metrics as well to find new things to give attention to, and most of our applicants will do some kind of work for their event, change things in their event. It shows that they care if they're going to put in the effort to put in a badging application. And we have a new launch coming November 1st. I'm super excited about that. We have several new metrics that are going to be added, and we're going to have a lot more to talk about with that coming November 1st. So I'd just like to say, before we do our thanks, before we say goodbye, I'd like to have some questions and suggestions from the audience if you'd be so willing. I expected it to be a much smaller room, but if you could shout your questions or suggestions at us, we'd be glad to hear what you have to say. Okay, it looks like we've got no questions or suggestions right now. I do have some questions for you that I'd like to ask, time permitting, and it looks like we got through it pretty quickly. So my first question for you is, how have positive DEI experiences improved how you feel about events, and what kind of positive experiences have you had? Okay. I don't think I'm going to go with, I'd rather skip right to the thank yous in this section. We have some major contributors to the project. Tola, Asta, and Sala from the Summer of Code, Shoya from Season of Docs, both in 2020. And they helped us get the project off of the ground, helped us get the documentation we needed. Maintainers, we have many maintainers of the project that help keep it alive and help make sure that the process goes as smoothly as it can. And the many, many reviewers that we have in the project, in the initiative, that are very instrumental to the functioning of the initiative. Local interns, volunteers, we've got all kinds of people that have been willing to contribute to the project, and I can't be thankful enough for that. It's really important for me to say that too. So as far as that goes, we have a couple links here if you'd like to apply to review for the badging initiative or if you'd like to apply for a badge. Oh, go ahead, sorry. Thank you. We had an audience member, thank you, say that the positive DEI experiences, even at this conference, are very useful and nice to see. I think I summarized it. Yeah, and that's why we want to thank all of you as well. We thank the people that came here. In this DEI conference, you are the life of the party, and I love to say that because I really mean it. And we have a section here to apply for a review, apply for a badge if you're an event organizer who's interested in that. And we I'd just like to thank all of you for being here. I'd also like to mention we got a very lucky organization name on GitHub. We got github.com/badging. So if you want to stop by and say hi, that's where we are. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Matt and Ruth, and I hope that Ruth can join us in person next time. I follow her online, so it'll be nice to meet her in real life one of these days. To follow up to your question, Matt, because it took me a second to think about it, and I don't know why, because I have so many positive experiences from events like this. Pretty early in my career, I attended Linux Women in Linux track at a conference, and that track was a huge career changer for me because it enabled me to feel comfortable to approach some women who spoke at that event afterwards and have one-on-one conversations with them. And through that, a year later, I gave my first talk at that event. I got that kind of encouragement and support and mentoring that I wouldn't have gotten, without that that opportunity to meet people in an environment that felt safe and welcoming. So thank you for that great talk, Matt. All right, coming up next, we've got Careers in Tech, Calling All Majors with Koren and Clarence.
Okay, hello everybody, or I will certainly say, hey y'all. I am from North Carolina, so all is certainly a part of my vocabulary, and it is not going anywhere. So my name is Clarence Clayton. I'm a senior manager of data privacy at Red Hat. Thank you all for being here today. I'm excited to be here with you, and thanks to anyone who's watching online as well. We're here for a few moments just to talk to you and share with you that regardless of your background, your major, or if you didn't even go to college, there is a place for you in technology. So look forward to speaking with you about that a little bit more. And I invite my friend and my co-host to introduce herself to everyone.
Hi everyone, I am Koren Townsend. I am a senior project manager at Red Hat in the marketing department, and we are here to just share a little bit about our journeys, but then also just about careers at Red Hat as well.
So Koren and I do bring greetings from Red Hat, but we would be remiss if we did not at least briefly talk about the BUILD community, which stands for Blacks United in Leadership and Diversity. It is one of Red Hat's diversity and inclusion communities, or ERG groups as some people know them. And what we do is foster a connected community of Black Red Hatters and allies, and do a lot of work to make sure that the causes that are important to Black associates are known, are talked about, and that we get focus on those with our senior leaders and people all throughout the company. So Koren, just tell us a little bit more about how BUILD does what we do and how we show up and make ourselves successful.
Yeah, we do a lot. That is an understatement. We do a lot as far as BUILD is concerned. Our focus, as you can see on the slides, is that we focus on education and membership development. We want to make sure that our Black associates feel connected and being educated. We've brought in external speakers from career development to, hey, should we take the vaccine? I mean, it's been a wide spectrum of topics that we bring into the company. But also community outreach. This is one thing very unique about Raleigh, is that there are a lot of opportunities to reach back and do things with local community centers, with underprivileged youth. The soup kitchen and the homeless shelters, we've also volunteered at. So it's not just about doing what's inside the walls of Red Hat, but actually going outside the walls of Red Hat to do more for our own communities. And then campus and university outreach, we really focus on connecting with HBCUs, which is historically Black colleges and universities. We have 5 here in the Triangle, in the area: Shaw University, St. Augustine University, and North Carolina A&T State University, North Carolina Central, and then we've also reached out to Winston-Salem State as well. So we try to really do connect to the students who are going to be getting these internships and coming into Red Hat as well. And then it's not all about fun and games. I mean, it's not all about just business. We do a lot of fun and games. We try to stay connected. Over the pandemic, I know everybody's been at home and Zoom fatigued out. But one thing that we have really started up was a happy hour that we do once a week that it keeps us all engaged. We talk about everything from, hey, what do you best restaurants to go to social issues, political issues. We've been online hours just connecting and staying engaged. So it's been a great opportunity for us to stay connected as a community. Next slide.
And I forgot to mention that we are founding members of the Build community and on the leadership team. So I'm honored to serve as the chair. Koren is the vice chair. But it takes a village. There's a ton of people behind us that do power the engine that is the Build community, and we're thankful for all of them. All right.
So, who likes to play games? Show of hands. Who's competitive when you're playing those games? Yeah, me too. I am. So, we're going to play a little game. It's called Guess the College Major. So, some of us coming into Red Hat, any technical careers, might have had a different story early on in our careers than what we're doing today. So we're going to play a little game. We're going to show you a couple people, their backgrounds, and you kind of can guess what their college majors were. Next. So hey, this is me. Yes, as I said, I am a senior project manager in marketing. So you can call out, show of hands, who thinks that I was a business admin major coming out of school? Couple hands. What about pre-med? Maybe a little bit more about mathematics. So that's about the thing. Yes. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I was a math major coming out of school. And for some of you, I'm pretty sure you can relate. Coming into my freshman year in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew was I like math and I was kind of good at it. So I came in, I talked to my advisor and some of my professors, and they said, hey, you're really good at math. Maybe you should be a math major. And I'm thinking, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Somebody going to pay me to do derivatives and integrals? I didn't see the connection. They said, well, what else do you like? And I said, well, I like computer science. I like programming. I said, take classes in computer science. So sophomore year, I took C++. Who else took C++ in here? Anybody? Yeah. I took C++ my sophomore year, and I was hooked at that point. And then from then on, I went on and graduated my undergrad, and I went on to grad school, got a degree in mathematics, with a computer science programming background, a minor, and graduated, and then all of a sudden I got a job being a quality assurance engineer, which was great for me because I was like, wow, so I get to poke holes at other people's code and break it and make them cry and get paid for it? Sign me up, I'm there. And so went and had a full, last 20 years I've been doing quality assurance and development work up until this past May, when I actually got an opportunity to dive a little bit more into project management and helping other people kind of enable them to do dev and coding and marketing work. And so I found something else I love. And this was not planned by far. I thought I'd be retiring as a QA engineer, but life had a different plan for me, and I love it. I love enabling other people to help them do their jobs and moving projects along. So that's how I came from math to PM.
All right. So my turn. So I mentioned in the intro, I'm a senior manager of data privacy. So these are my choices, and we'll run through them really quickly. Who thinks I was an accounting major in college? Okay, a couple of people. Criminal justice. It seems like a few more. Chemical engineering. Wow, a lot of those. Okay. Hate to disappoint y'all. I was an accounting major. I do not like science as a subject. I appreciate science, so it was certainly not chemical engineering for me. And I only wanted to do 4 years of school. So accounting was my major in undergrad. And my story is that, like Koren, I always liked numbers and still like numbers. And I've always been really good at math and working with them. And so people said, you should major in something that involves working with numbers. And really the choices were between accounting and math. But maybe due to just, part of what we're talking about today, I chose not to go into math because I said, well, I don't really want to be a teacher. And not really thinking there are probably tons of other career opportunities that would have been available to me. So I went with accounting, and I did, and it was pretty good for me, but most students that do well in accounting are expected to go into public accounting, so working for one of the big 4 firms, and I really didn't want to do that. So by the time I was about to graduate, I didn't really know what I was going to do with this degree that I had. And I had a job offer at DuPont in Delaware, and I really didn't want to move to Delaware. No offense to people from Delaware or anything about the state. It's lovely. So I just said, that's not really what I want to do. And so a friend of mine who was going to work at IBM in engineering sent my resume to a recruiter. And next thing you know, they reached out to me and I was offered a job in accounting. By the time I started, I was actually in the accounting information systems group. So I really wasn't doing accounting. It was like accounting adjacent. And a little frustrated because I didn't feel really prepared based on my experience in the degree that I obtained. But I stuck with it and figured it out, and then was on my way to careers as a business analyst, later a project manager, and then during my time at Red Hat have sort of diversified my experience even more to now be leading a team of privacy specialists and experts that keep us compliant with privacy laws all over the world. So that is certainly not something I could have ever envisioned I would be doing 20 years ago when I started my career, but it's a testament to the fact that it's really not where you start or what your degree is, but just being open to the opportunities and the learning and just seeing where your career can go. So we have a couple of other quick stories that were shared with us by some of our colleagues, and we'll run through these a little quickly. So Cliff is a manager in tech support. And the choices we have there on the screen, or maybe y'all can't see them, I don't know. Oh yeah, they are. Mechanical engineering, biology, and art history. We won't do the show of hands for this one. I'll sort of cut to the chase. Cliff was a biology major in undergrad, which is very interesting to me. But what Cliff shared was that he was in a program in high school that was meant to bring more diversity and more doctors into the profession, more black doctors into the profession. And so he just continued with that and majored in biology in college. But he always had a love and an affinity for technology, had a part-time job while he was in college doing support work. And his uncle was a COBOL programmer, and he always spent a lot of time around him and was inspired by him. So even after he got his degree, he just felt like tech was his true calling, his passion. And so he pursued that and has gone on to have a very successful career in the support organization. The other thing that Cliff shared with me is because of his experience and what he went through, that he often looks for people from non-traditional backgrounds. So he's told me he hired someone with a pharmacy background. He told me he hired somebody who went to law school and just decided that it wasn't for them, and that they've gone on to have very successful careers in the support organization as well. So they're just more data points of what it is that we're saying here, that the major is just one thing, but there's just so much more to the story.
So one more story, Milty. She is a software maintenance engineer. From those three, classical language, biomedical engineering, and anthropology, very different than what she's doing now, and I'll let Clarence go to the next slide. But she was actually a major in classical languages. Not only classical languages, she had a minor in Russian. So far from being a support engineer, but her journey is very interesting because one of the few that I've ever heard so vastly different. She had an undergrad in classical language and minor in Russian from Vanderbilt University. She actually applied to go to the Juilliard School, which is a very predominant performing arts school in New York City. Didn't get in, so then she went to Plan B, made some connections at Jackson State University, started working in their computer science department. And then loved it so much, decided to get her master's degree in computer science. And then from then it's history. And just the fact that she actually is very much still a part of the music and theater. She still loves that, but she's had a really great career as an engineer at Red Hat. And I think that's probably one of the most vastly different extremes of going from non-tech to technical degrees. But yeah, she's just one of the many stories we have. So yes, Red Hat is hiring all kinds of roles, diverse applicants they're looking for. One thing just a caveat is that Clarence and I are not HR professionals. We are not a part of the HR community. We are here in a capacity to increase diversity and show that Red Hat is diverse, and they are trying. The next slide will kind of show you a couple of just a word cloud of all the different job roles, and we guys got these off of the online site this week of non-technical roles. So, we have lawyers, we have graphic designers, facilities, operations. There's a lot of diversity in the types of roles. It's not just about engineering. We do need engineers because that's what makes the company, work. But there are a lot of other roles that are non-technical. So.
Totally agree. And Koren and I were talking about this like earlier this week, but it's just common knowledge. Yes, the engineers are essential to our success. They are using their creativity, their brilliant minds, and their innovation to create the products that keep us viable and successful, and thinking about the challenges that businesses are facing that they may not even realize they're facing, and coming up with the solutions for that. So we have to have our engineers. So I'm so thankful for everybody in those disciplines. But you have to have salespeople to sell those ideas and solutions to companies. You have to have marketing people to come up with brand ideas and campaigns that are going to resonate with people. And yes, you're going to have people to count the money. You're going to have people to make sure that we keep our policies up to date and that we're following global, guidelines and regulations, that the systems that those people need to be successful are operational. So their roles for everybody in the organization, and it is not just limited to people with engineering or computer science backgrounds. One thing that I wanted to say a few minutes ago, earlier in my career, I dealt with a case of imposter syndrome. I still deal with it in other ways, but I would be in meetings with people that were developers or people with computer science or engineering backgrounds, and sometimes I would say, am I worthy of having this conversation with them? Are they going to drop some technical knowledge or technical jargon on me that's just going to make me seem inadequate or ill-prepared to be a part of this discussion? And 20 years into my career, I've just sort of learned everybody has different skills that are needed to make the project and make the organization successful. So yes, please bring your technical knowledge to the table, and I will bring, my skills and organizational methods and ways to collaborate and bring people in to make us successful, and that we're together being our best selves and powering Red Hat or any company's success based on the skills that we bring to the table. So as we transition to the close, I want one thing to be clear. Your degree, or frankly, even the lack of one, does not define your career options or path. I have found that, the course or the road of my career has certainly not been linear. It has been long and winding and took twists and turns that I never would have anticipated. And the other thing, these soft skills, whether you're a classical languages major, a math major, biology, chemical engineering, accounting, you still need the ability to communicate. You still need the ability to present. You still need the ability to work with others. And so there's certain skills that are just transferable across any degree, any discipline. And you've got to have those no matter what if you're going to make it. Developers have to make presentations. People in accounting make presentations. So you can pick that up anywhere, and it's going to be essential to your success. So, Koren, I'll turn this one over to you.
I mean, like Clarence was mentioning, technical or non-technical, your career is really about what you make it. As you said, is kind of your career kind of zigzag. Yeah, I never thought I'd end up in project management from where I started, but step into the role, you take the advantage of the opportunities and just see where it goes. There's a lot of less technical roles at Red Hat as well. It's not just about engineering, as we mentioned. It's about understanding that there's a place for everyone. It's not just about diversity in the people, but about diversity of thought as well. And that's what I think really makes Red Hat really unique in that case. And yes, Red Hat is hiring. If we go to the next slide, at jobs.redhat.com, check it out. All the roles that we shared with you, all of them were taken from the website this week. So take a look if you're interested, and I think there's a place for everyone. And of course, we're on LinkedIn, Connect. We are happy to, get you connected and network and understanding the value in networking completely. But we're here to connect and talk more. So any final words?
That's it. Thank you for having us, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thanks.
Thank you.
everyone. Is there feedback or is that just me? Okay. I understand that things have been running a little early today, and so they've asked me to get started. So I know it's a few minutes ahead of schedule, but I'm very happy to be here and I'm happy to jump in. So my name is Dee Dee Lavender, and I currently work as an engineering manager at Zip. I've worked in technology for the past 7 or so years, and most of that time was spent as a back-end engineer. My background before tech is pretty eclectic. I've worked in several other industries, including construction and trucking. But my most recent professional endeavor before coding was opening and then operating a brick and mortar retail store for children and their families. Imagine my transition from toys and cute little baby clothes to Jira and intense discussions about code editors. There were more than a few things that were tough in that transition. Some were expected. I knew about the lack of overall diversity in tech, related to skin color, gender, age, parental status, etc. Some things were unexpectedly hard. Pizza was incredibly hard to avoid. Remember pre-pandemic days? It was at every tech meetup, lunch and learn, you name it. Another unexpectedly not fun thing was meetings. Compared to my previous jobs, there are a lot of meetings in tech. On the one hand, that isn't a bad thing. We need to build shared understanding. We need to plan and prepare. We want to be informed and connected. On the other hand, how many meetings actually accomplish those goals effectively? I've been to so many awful meetings in tech. I'm curious, and you don't need to raise your hands, just silently reflect. In the last 2 weeks, how many of you have been to a meeting with no agenda? How about a meeting during which you did not speak or otherwise contribute? How about a meeting you probably could have skipped or didn't even really need to attend? I wish I could have all those many hours back when I sat in an hour-long meeting with a group of engineers and only 3 or 4 people spoke the entire time, and the meeting ended without a single action item or clear decision. At first, I thought, I'm new to the industry. When I know more, I'll contribute. Then I realized there were several people in those meetings who knew way more than I did and were also not contributing. So I started trying to really understand what was going on. Because here's the thing, in my life before and outside of technology, I regularly facilitate amazing group discussions all the time. They're interesting, even fun, consistently have a 100% participation rate, and are extremely productive. I know it sounds incredible, but it's true. I volunteer as a sexuality educator for children, mostly 5th graders and their families, and use a curriculum called OWL, which stands for Our Whole Lives. Now, the work I do as a sexuality educator covers lots of topics, many of which can be awkward or even difficult. Families each come with their own unique mix of values, characteristics, communication styles, and even concerns. Now layer that with the individual personalities and experiences of the children and their parents or caregivers. Some are shy, some are nervous, some are extremely opinionated, some are talkers, some are not happy. Actually, this is sounding a little bit like some of the engineering teams I've been on, which leads us back to meetings in tech. Through the years, despite all the awful meetings, there were a handful of good and even great meetings. And guess what made the difference? The moderator, every single time. So while my experience as a moderator and facilitator was growing, my experience as a participant was as well. And I started to really analyze what worked and what didn't. One thing that stood out to me was the huge difference in the level of engagement and sense of belonging I noticed between the OWL participants and the engineers. In OWL sessions, the moderator works hard to be sure that the participants know from the beginning that their opinion matters and that the group will benefit from each individual's contribution. Building trust is a key objective from the very first meeting. Back in tech meetings, this was hardly happening, if at all. And I thought about who wasn't contributing. The person that gave the most thoughtful PR reviews, the one everyone wanted to discuss their work with, the engineer that wrote such amazing code you were inspired to study it, the person on the team with a really unique perspective. The cost of not hearing the possible contributions from everyone in a meeting is something to consider deeply. The cost of making anyone feel excluded or like they don't belong is too high to ignore. I'm convinced that poorly run meetings reduce your team's overall productivity and damage folks' sense of belonging. So today we're going to dive into the role of the moderator, the meeting leader, the facilitator. This role is critical and I believe carries the responsibility for the outcome of the meeting. In the same way that we expect teachers to utilize a variety of tools and techniques for teaching, we don't ask children to adjust their learning style. Putting the burden of the meeting outcome on participants is a recipe for failure. The moderator bears the burden of creating an atmosphere where each person feels their contributions matter and they're comfortable participating. It all starts way before the actual meeting. And I would say it starts even before planning the meeting. To craft an inclusive meeting, an effective moderator needs a wide range of tools and techniques to creatively engage everyone participating. So let's start with what I like to call the Moderators Toolbox. Your goal as a moderator is to remove any and all barriers to participation. To do this, you need to consider psychological barriers. There may also be physical or logistic barriers, and we're going to discuss that as well. But for now, I want you to consider that you may not know or be able to know all the factors that are possibly holding someone back from contributing. It could be that they're shy, or suffering from imposter syndrome, or feeling insecure about their level of experience or knowledge. You want to level the playing field as much as you can. I challenge you to use anonymity whenever possible. This will go further than you think. When you're in person, make sure all your sticky notes and pens are the same color. When you're in a virtual meeting, use products that support anonymity like Jamboard, and there are others. Also, remember how only a few people talked during those awful hour-long meetings I mentioned? If your group is larger than 5 or 6 people, break out into smaller groups for any discussion. The ideal size for a small group discussion is between 3 and 5 people. The larger the group, the longer amount of time they need for everyone to be comfortable contributing. So small group discussions actually fit into the next item as well, and that is to develop a wide range of techniques for encouraging participation. Maybe you put folks in pairs and have them record each other's thoughts. Maybe you ask each small group to address a different topic and then bring those discussion points back to the larger group. Or maybe you ask each group to decide on what's important to them, and now you have a collection of important feelings from everyone. Sometimes small groups are not the answer. Perhaps you give the whole group 5 minutes of silence so that each person can reflect and record their own thoughts or opinions. Perhaps you have the whole group working collectively on the same digital document. It doesn't all need to be verbal or vocal. If you're in person, you can actually encourage some movement. Have folks move to a different location in the room based on their choice or opinion. If you agree, move to the right. If you don't, move to the left. You can do similar things online with built-in tools that are in the video conferencing applications. On Google Meet, maybe you ask a series of yes or no questions and ask folks to raise a hand. On Zoom, maybe you ask yes or no questions and ask folks to shut off their video. If you want everyone to answer a question or share an idea, try asking them to answer in the round. This ensures everyone speaks and helps those who need time to prepare to know where they are in line. Always be explicit that passing is allowed. We don't want to force anyone to participate if they don't have anything to share. But you can also use the tennis ball method. So in an online meeting, this is obviously an abstract idea, but whoever is speaking tosses the ball to or chooses the next person to speak. Now, this is only really suitable for groups of less than 8 to 10 people. Otherwise, it becomes hard to keep track of who has yet to be called on. If you're okay with only a few contributions, you can suggest popcorn style. This is when folks speak as they're moved, but only speak once. There are so many options here. You can use polls or surveys or Google Forms right inside your meeting. Have it set up ahead of time and then give folks the time they need to fill it out during the meeting. This is a way to ensure 100% participation. So this sort of leads to the next idea, which is to elevate the written components of your meeting time. The things I just mentioned, polls, surveys, Google Forms, they all help with this. The idea is that you're trying to capture the thoughts and opinions of your participants. This is critical data that you want to capture and record. If you're in person, this means that you scribe or record all contributions. So if you're thinking ahead, you could ask someone to help you with this or ask someone to volunteer to do it. But this means that you're writing things down as people say it on a whiteboard or a flip chart. If you're online, you can use digital artifacts for collaboration with this, and that helps with this. Google Docs or Sheets, something where everyone can be contributing at the same time. When you put folks in small groups, ask for a note taker or volunteer in each group, or assign one, like right when you break out, not as an afterthought. Adding importance to these written components in your meeting serves multiple purposes. It helps capture those fresh ideas and thoughts. It helps those who are more visually inclined, and it acts as a record of what was discussed or accomplished. Now, there are times that things will not go as you'd hoped. One of your best and most important skills as a moderator is to be flexible and willing to pivot. If something isn't working, scrap it. Try something else. When you have a wide range of methods for encouraging participation, you can easily pivot to another technique. Turn your creative juices on, be agile, and remember, you are responsible for the outcome of the meeting. Okay, now that you're feeling well equipped, lots of techniques to choose from, it's time to start planning the meeting. Now, I cannot overstate the importance of establishing a really clear objective for your meeting. Without this, everything else becomes much more difficult. A clear objective with a solid idea of your expected outcomes is paramount. What do you want to convey? What do you want the participants to share or to come away with? What do you hope to learn from the participants? This is all thought work that you've done ahead of the meeting time. If you're working with a group of people and it isn't clear what the objective of the meeting should be, I'm sorry if you're in that position, but you can crowdsource this. You can run a brainstorming session about what topics folks would like to discuss, have everyone vote, and now you have a list of topics to work from. Is your list getting low? Repeat the exercise. People actually want to talk about things. The next thing is crafting the schedule or the structure of the meeting. And there are several considerations you'll need to take into account beforehand. How much time is needed? How many participants will be there? A critical aspect to planning your meeting is budgeting your time wisely. And this is directly related to the number of people in the meeting. Do you know how long it takes for 20 people to introduce themselves? Well, it depends on what structure you've put in place. Without any structure, it could easily take more than an hour, and that would only be 3 minutes per person on average. By creating a structured prompt, name, title, favorite vegetable, you might get it down to 15 or 20 minutes. By providing a structured order, like going around the circle or posting a list of names in the video chat, you might get it down to 10 minutes. This is an example, a small one, to show you the power of creating structure, considering your participants and allotted time, all in service of your objectives. Now, there are many ways to creatively design the strategies you'll use to generate your desired outcomes. If your objective is simply to disseminate information, the structure of your meeting will be fairly straightforward. If you want to gather feedback, gauge interest, or make sure participants have an increased understanding of a concept or a topic, then you need to design a meeting that can capture all of those inputs. So let's say you have a clear objective, you've planned the structure of the meeting. This is translated to your agenda, which you should publish as early as possible. I have a whole separate talk about introverts and extroverts, but I'll say this. Your introverts need time outside of the meeting to think deeply about the topics before they'll be prepared to contribute to the discussion. When introverts are listening, they are listening deeply. They are not preparing their response. Ever wonder why some people sort of pause before responding? I promise you, you want to know what the introverts on your team are thinking. And every team has at least 30 to 50%, is comprised of 30 to 50% introverts. Okay. The other thing you want to consider before the meeting are logistics. These are those sort of physical things I was mentioning before. Is your meeting in person? How much space do you need? Please don't invite 12 people to a meeting room with a table that seats 6. This does not make everyone feel like they are on equal footing, with some at the table and some squeezed into the corners of the room. Are you going to ask folks to break into smaller groups? If so, do you have enough space for folks to move chairs around? What about supplies? Sticky notes, poster paper, whiteboard, pens. This all depends on the meeting structure that you've planned. Will you have some folks participating remotely? Then everyone should act like they're remote. A hybrid meeting with some remote and some in-person is a place where inclusion can really take a hit. Just plan to level the playing field and have everyone use their laptop. If anyone is remote, act like everyone is remote. You want each person to be able to see and hear each participant. Otherwise, you're asking for disengagement. We're just humans, after all. Which leads to the next important step for a moderator, and that is setting the tone. You've planned it all out, and now the meeting is here, and you, the moderator, are responsible for setting the tone. Don't neglect this aspect. Being clear with yourself about your own intentions ahead of time is really critical. A moderator is not there to get their point across. If that's your intention, send an email. Your intention to stay committed to the desired outcome of the meeting is crucial. And your intentions impact the tone of the meeting from the very beginning. So start the meeting by stating the purpose of the meeting and reiterating the objectives, the hoped for outcomes, and the planned agenda. In some cases, it can be helpful to set ground rules or develop group agreements. Once established, these can be periodically reviewed and should be consistently enforced by the moderator. Things like not interrupting or not speaking twice before everyone else has had the chance to speak once are sometimes important to call out. Another important element to setting an inclusive tone is to include introductions and/or icebreakers. Learning folks' names, how to correctly pronounce them, is key to building an inclusive environment. And trust is built as we get to know each other. Icebreakers might seem cheesy. Okay, they definitely are cheesy. But they're also effective in lightening the mood and getting each person to contribute something small early on in the meeting. Okay, so the tone of the meeting is in a good place. And now we're going to make the magic of the meeting happen. As you live into your intention to be an effective moderator during the meeting, be aware and observant and watch for patterns. Women and non-binary folks speak less and are interrupted more. Introverts do not interrupt, and those who are newer to the company or who have fewer years of experience may need special encouragement. When meetings exclude some voices, the benefit of a diverse team is squandered. Your job as the moderator is to steer the discussion. You've done all this work to plan the meeting and set the tone. So now it is your responsibility to keep the conversation on track. This also includes minding the time. Timing is very tricky. This comes with experience, and you're not going to always get it right. While you want to stick to your schedule and your agenda, you also want to balance that with the spirit of the moment. So this is one of the really tricky things about being a good moderator, is minding the time. Do you skip something on the agenda because what you're doing is so important? That's a call you have to make in the moment. And the last thing is to be courageous. This means a lot of different things. It means you interrupt those interrupters. Oh, hey, hang on for a second. I wasn't sure that we let so-and-so finish. I'm really curious where they were going with that, right? Sometimes it means calling on someone who hasn't had an opportunity to contribute and asking if they agree with what's been said. That's a yes or no question. It's a very easy way to invite someone to share more broadly. If someone is rude or inappropriate, it is your job to call them out and correct that right then and there. It doesn't need to be in a shaming way. It needs to be in a very direct and calm way to say, that's inappropriate, we don't do that here, and then move on. Courage is needed for all of these things: sticking to the schedule, steering the discussion, making split-second decisions about when to move on and when to make space. You also have to have the courage to acknowledge your mistakes as a moderator and retrace your steps if necessary. You might have to move backwards to correct something. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about some tips and tricks for moderators. This is a big, important job. You have to remain neutral. If this is a conversation where you feel like you have to contribute or you have to take a side, ask someone else to moderate. As a moderator, you are facilitating. Your participation will distract you from your job. The next thing is that you have to listen and listen well. And this is a skill that takes practice. You also may need to clarify, and knowing when to do that is really important. This is one of my biggest tips. Silence is your friend. Sometimes in a meeting, when folks are contributing, and you can tell that the same folks keep talking and there are some who haven't, a very effective thing to say is, we're going to pause and wait to hear from those folks who haven't yet contributed. And then you wait. And you wait longer than you might think you need to. And I promise, you can find me anywhere on the internet. I want you to tell me if this doesn't happen. Someone will speak up. It takes more time than you think it does. Also, silence is not bad. Silence allows things to grow and cultivate. Silence is your friend. And the last thing is to experiment. I've only mentioned a small number of things that you can do. The world is your oyster. Be as creative as you can be as a moderator, and be willing to make mistakes. That's how we learn. Now, after the meeting, there are some things that you can do to really solidify the impact that you've had as an effective moderator. Follow up and talk about the highlights of the meeting, what was discussed, and publish those action items. The other thing is to publish all of the notes or data that was collected. Now, this might take some time on your part, but it will be worth it. Folks do go back and look to see what everyone else had to say. Next, you want to reflect. What worked? What didn't? As a moderator, you can constantly be improving. There is no final destination. You just keep working at it and evaluating your performance as a moderator every single time you lead a meeting. Then you start planning your next meeting. They never end, right? There are so many. Okay, some folks say, how can I employ these things or utilize these tips if I'm not the moderator? So when you're invited to a meeting, ask for the agenda. Ask what the objective of the meeting is. This can help force the moderator to do some of that, like planning work. There are lots of things you can do during the meeting to support inclusivity. If you notice that some folks haven't spoken, you can use your turn to ask someone what they think. And you can help interrupt the interrupters and return the moment to the original speaker. If the discussion has gotten off track, you can jump in with a question to help realign to the meeting objective. And lastly, you could volunteer to moderate. I hope you're getting a sense of the importance of the moderator's commitment to the meeting and the meeting objective. When everyone is able to contribute, to be heard, and feel like they're included, you reap the full benefits from the diversity on your team. And I've witnessed the impact of inclusive meetings. It is transformative. When you have an environment where everyone has the chance to contribute, all voices have an equal weight, and it's safe to share your thoughts and opinions, you have a team with a deep sense of belonging, and that is the definition of inclusivity. Thank you very much for your time today.
All right, thank you. I resisted the urge several times to stand up and clap because I like the motto, no agenda, no attenda for a meeting. And we have my team, as Dee Dee was saying, if you don't like the way a meeting is run, you can subtly lead from behind or volunteer to moderate. On my team, I tend to moderate a lot of our meetings now because I do keep us on schedule and try to make sure everyone gets included. So be warned that if you have the great ideas, you could end up being a leader of your meetings. So thank you, that was great. All right, all the talks have been great so far. We are gonna have a break now, and then we will have a group discussion. I believe we'll be setting up a microphone so that you all will be able to ask questions, or if you want me to ask questions for you, find me in here or in the hallway track during the break. See you back here shortly. All right. We ready to do some group moderated discussion, followed by a wonderful socially distanced networking social outside that will have snacks and beverages. All right. Am I missing any speakers who wanted to participate in the group discussion? Wasn't sure who all was here. All right. Okay, so the way this will work is we do have a microphone down here so that you can come ask the questions. Obviously, you don't want to put your mouth on the microphone. Stand back from it, but talk into it, shout out it. And that is to help us also for people, for the recording for later, and to make sure everyone can hear up here. And if you all don't have questions for our speakers, I have a few questions, and then hopefully you all will have questions for each other, or any things that you know how you get off stage and you're like, oh, I forgot to say this thing. This is a good opportunity to say those things that you forgot also. So here, I'll go ahead and I'll start with a question that I like to ask. You all have been doing what you're doing for a while now, and I think about young Rikki entering this industry was a very different person than I am now. If you could talk to yourself, entering the industry now, what kind of advice or tips would you offer? Like, what have you learned that you could prevent, pain you could have prevented yourself or whatever? You want to start down here and we can just go down?
Of course. Here's some advice that I tell folks. So I actually started as a computer science major at North Carolina A&T. And I went through so many twists and turns into different industries, financial, government, nonprofit, and all those. And then I found my way back to tech. And so some advice that someone gave me, actually Denise Dumas, she's a former VP at Red Hat, she told me this was advice to give especially young women or people from underrepresented groups. She said, if you're in tech, don't let anyone take you away from the code. She was like, stay as close to the code as you can, either as a developer or the maintainer or something, because sometimes, especially women and people that identify as women, they will put you in roles because you might be a natural nurturer or you might have a lot of leadership. And so then all of a sudden they're pushing you towards manager and program manager. And eventually your career sometimes stalls out. Whereas men or folks that identify as men, they keep them close to the code because that feels more technical, and then their career really accelerates. So if I had to go back, back 25 years ago or so, when I was back in computer science and programming in C++, and I was a really good programmer, I would not have let anyone take me away from the code when they dangled that management position out in front of me. That's something that I wouldn't say it was a regret because I like where I ended up, but I would have done that differently.
So a couple of things come to mind for me. Some of it I think we talked about a little bit in the talk, but it's being willing to see where the ride is going to take you and not try to be so prescriptive about how you think your career should be. Sometimes you will find that there are people, mentors, sponsors that see something in you that you might not even see in yourself. And they are telling you that you need to pursue this opportunity. And you have to be okay with that discomfort of going into and stepping into something new. It can be unsettling, but it could be something really, really amazing on the other side. And I know that I've seen that happen a couple of times in my career once I got through that frustrating part, that I really, really stretched myself and my career grew each time I was willing to do that. The other thing that I would say for my personal journey, I only recently got into management within the last 2 years. And that was what I chose. It was what I thought was right for me. Although, again, there were people who said, you should be in management. You should be a leader. And I do believe anyone can be a leader. You don't have to be in management to be a leader. But I think I would have maybe tried to be more receptive to the idea earlier in my career if I had it to do over again. But I'm also a very firm believer in you being prepared for the moment that you're in, and it worked out the way that it was supposed to. So it's, pros and cons depending on how you look at it. But those would be my two things.
So I'm just reflecting about how I wish I had y'all's advice when I was younger. I also did some coding in college and was discouraged from continuing, and I think about that. I ended up in several other industries and have only been in technology for about 7 years, but making the transition as a parent with small children who depended on me for income was incredibly stressful. And I think we learn from our mistakes, so I wouldn't necessarily say to that person transitioning, don't do this or don't do that. But I might just say, it's going to be okay.
Oh, I don't need that. I agree. One thing that I found as I mentioned before, so my sophomore year in college, I decided to take a C++ class. When I walked in, this was at North Carolina State University, which is here in Raleigh, a very large university and very heavily into engineering. When I walked into the classroom, and it was probably a classroom full of maybe 100 people or so, and on two hands I could count the number of women that I saw, and maybe 2 fingers that I saw, the number of black people. And I knew at that point that I had an opportunity. I could have walked out and said, no, this is not for me. I don't see me in here. I don't know if this is my place. But I stuck with it and stayed. Every study group I ever had, I was the only female and definitely the only black female. I could have turned around and said, this is not for me. This industry is not representing who I am. But I'm so glad that I stuck with it and stayed the course, because it would have turned out so much differently if I had not have just stayed in there. And yeah, you may not see you when you walk into a room. And even in corporate America, sometimes I may be the only black person. I've been in a company where I was the only black person. and it's not that, oh, I quit because I don't see myself. No, it's that, well, somebody else will have a little bit easier road if I stick with it, and always trying to think about giving back. So I think it's really important to stay the course. And it's going to be hard. Nobody says it's going to be easy, but stay the course. And you never know who is looking at you as an example and as a role model.
Great answers. Thank you so much. I love it. All right, and now we'll open the floor to you all also. And I will say in advance, because I forgot to give this heads up before, make sure they are questions though, because we don't want to have long debates in between speakers and attendees. So yes, please do. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Georg Link. My pronouns are he, him, his. Thank you for everything that you have already shared. And one thing, Demetris, was talking about code of conducts, it's like we have them now in most communities, and it's almost awkward not to have one in a community. Now we are on to how do we actually enforce behaviors and make sure that we live that. I was just wondering, we have come quite far in some aspects, and we still have some ways to go. What are some things that you're really proud of that open source has already accomplished to become more diverse and inclusive? And what is the next challenge that you wish we all would focus on?
That was great. All right, anyone want to start?
So it's two questions. So something that I think that open source should really be proud of is the inclusive naming work that's being done, specifically the inclusive naming initiative. I know that many companies were thinking about this several years ago, and it was only recently, probably within the last 1 or 2 years, that it became like a hot topic. And we started really looking at the language that's being used, and there were some uncomfortable conversations. Like, I'm pretty sure you all saw some of the back and forth that was going to, amongst communities, especially when you brought in international considerations where folks were like, this isn't an issue here, so I don't know why it's an issue there, or this is the way it's always been done. Even language around like meritocracy. Like, that's kind of one of the founding principles of open source, right? But the open source community was willing to take a look, a hard look, and step into a space that might have turned off a lot of people that have been here, like some of the founders. So that's something that I'm just like really, really proud of. I'm like the queen of shameless plugs around here. I'm really proud that we are now starting to take a look at how we can work on this together collectively through something like All In. It doesn't have to be through All In. There's tons of work that's being done, as you just mentioned, and it's been going on for years, but it just felt like everybody was kind of in their own silos, in their own communities, in their own companies working on this. And so I think that we realized that we know how to open source stuff. We know how to collaborate. We know how to work together. Why can't we do it at diversity and inclusion? And now we're ready to step into that space. So that's something that I'm truly looking forward to, not just because I'm doing it.
I was going to add something with a disclaimer. The work that I do is not specifically in the open source community, but I work at Red Hat, so I feel like we're all a part of the open source community because of that. I think in many things, the first thing is acknowledging that a problem actually exists. And I don't think it's any secret that there are some diversity challenges that the open source community in general is facing. There are not a lot of Black people that you see in open source communities. And that's something that I think, desperately needs to change. But I applaud over the last year, especially as we've had to, have sort of a reflection about many things in the world, that I think that's one as well, is figuring out what do we need to do to increase the outreach, to increase the participation and change the makeup of these open source communities. And I think, there are a lot of strategies. I love the work that Demetris and GitHub are doing with the All In program. I think there needs to be more of that. In conversations I've had with, people at college campuses, open source curriculum or open source principles and methodologies, really aren't taught. So I think, at least at, the schools I've taught to, which are primarily historically Black colleges. So I think finding ways to make stronger relationships and get, this next generation of students excited about open source early is going to help and also do what Koren said, is that's going to show the people behind them that there are people who look like me in this area and make it a little bit easier road for them.
All right. Great questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will say, from my personal experience, I'm really glad that booth babes isn't an acceptable thing anymore, because when I started in this industry, when I was managing editor of Sysadmin magazine more than 20 years ago, I got stuck in a booth with two perfectly lovely models in New York. But the assumption was I wasn't an expert on the topic, and that I was, hired just to stand at the booth and hand out magazines. And I don't miss those days at all. So that was a great question. Thank you for asking it. And before the next question, Todd wanted me to remind everyone that he'll be giving away that the little MacBook, whatever. MacBook Pro to one lucky attendee in here at the end of this. So thank you all for being in here with us. All right, next question, please.
Hi, really great action items from all of you today, but it's great to see so many people coming from non-traditional backgrounds and finding their way to tech. I'm wondering if there's anything that companies can do to kind of help welcome more people into tech and provide space for that non-traditional path.
I'll start, so I know a project that Red Hat is currently working on right now is more inclusive job descriptions. These job descriptions are written very humorously to me at times, and I've seen some examples where they say, 15 years of Kubernetes experience, and I'm like, I don't know that Kubernetes has actually been around for the amount of time that they're actually writing the job description for. So I think that we put such unreasonable expectations and demands in these job descriptions, and I can tell you, we had a conversation about this recently, where I'm told that there are people who just found the job descriptions daunting, and say, I'm not going to apply because I don't feel like I check every single box on this very, very comprehensive and daunting job description. And so I think the more that we can write these job descriptions in a way that even encourages people to apply if they don't necessarily check every box, or say that people from numerous backgrounds are welcome and encouraged to participate in the interview process. I think that that's a step towards where we need to go to continue to increase that outreach to non-traditional backgrounds.
Yeah, and I'll add to that is one thing that Red Hat has been doing a little bit more of is more of the outreach, the D&I communities that Clarence and I are a part of, is being a part of that process. That, it's not, we don't expect them to get it right because we need a seat at the table in order to help encourage the language to those job descriptions. Or how are we recruiting? Where are we trying to pull people from? Are we looking at community colleges, which is sometimes a non-traditional way of coming into Red Hat, and understanding that those areas exist. So that's one thing that I can see Red Hat really doing a little bit better at is working on how are we bringing people in, and what are we looking for, especially when it comes down to these job descriptions. Absolutely.
So I would love to see the larger companies actually offer internal to their company apprenticeships where folks who are interested in engineering can spend some time with that department or with a specific mentor, and then see that company actually sponsor that person to go through code school. They can then come back to the company with new skills. They have the context of the company already. This is like a great investment and a way to really help folks from non-traditional backgrounds get into technology.
And it's an extension of what was already said. I would also like to see companies and organizations actually provide, and I want to be careful with this, additional training for recruiters. Because when you're applying for a job, that recruiter is going to be the one that sees your resume first, right? And if they don't have the training to look for those transferable skills, they're just going to kick your resume out and put it in the no file because they might not be able to see the value that you could bring even though you come from a non-traditional background. I'll even speak from personal experience. So I have been doing DA&I work for over a decade in government. I had done it in nonprofit space, all these different spaces. But when I wanted to go back into corporate America, would apply for jobs, and ones that I know I was qualified for, and I swear they would reject my application in like 45 seconds. I was like, did anybody even read it? Like, what's happening? And so I started talking. I found some recruiter friends, and they said, oh, it's because you don't have any corporate experience, so we're not going to hire you. So what kind of malarkey is that? But I had to go through and do a lot of networking, and I'm very grateful because Clarence helped me. I was like, I want this, and I was at Red Hat prior to GitHub. I was like, I want this DEI position at Red Hat, but no one can really see my value because I don't have a company listed on my resume. And so I had to do a lot of networking in order to get past that recruiter stage. So I would love for companies to really, really work on unconscious bias training and just really a lot of things at that TA level.
Thank you.
And to follow up on what you said, I love the idea though that you kind of kicked in the door yourself, you know, and I always highly recommend that is if you don't have a member of your network, you know, you can make a member of your network. You know, you can reach out to people via LinkedIn or Twitter, and you might get some rejections, but you don't need all of them to be yeses, right? You just need that one yes that helps you get into the door. Great question, thank you. All right, next question.
Hi there, my name's Ray. I found sort of this common thread between what a lot of y'all were thinking about. You're making me think about, I think of the phrase, commenting is contributing, and a lot of my first introductions to contributing to anything that was open was Wikipedia, and I have a question or sort of a prompt. I want to get y'all's opinion on contributing to completely open projects, and how do you sort of softly introduce someone who's new, not me, I'm not new anymore, but how do you softly introduce new people to this idea of contributing to something that's completely open, where probably your changes will be overwritten and is probably subject, when it's overwritten, to bias?
That's a great, heavy question. Thank you. That was good.
Are you able to help summarize that a little bit? I think I got lost.
Yeah, you were asking, if I'm understanding you right, you were asking how do you introduce someone who's new to open source to getting started contributing to a project for the first time and setting expectations correctly that their contributions might not be accepted right away?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so that you don't immediately be like, no, you suck. That's not what you're saying at all. You know, so how do you help them ease them into contributing?
Whenever I talk to people, especially students who are completely new to open source, I always start with a conversation around the power of collaboration and just understanding what it means to not be because that's what we were all taught, like, you know, the education system is you kind of work in isolation on yours, you turn in your project, and it's for your grade. But with open source, it doesn't really work like that, right? Like, you want to make sure that you understand the and lean into the collective power of everybody that's within your community. And so I always say, start with the conversation around collaboration and what this means and how do they feel about it before you even send them over into start contributing to communities. Because if they get that collaboration right, then they will understand that, hey, this might not be the best idea for the greater good. Someone else has it. And if they come up with a better idea, it makes all of us better. So I would just say start with collaboration.
I think Demetris covered like the crux of your question, but I just want to say that there are some open source projects out there that are really easy and fun to contribute to, and that I might start with a suggestion for something that's not going to be overridden or hard to be accepted. And in fact, just talked to some folks recently about Hacktoberfest, and that one of my early contributions in trying to like participate in the Hacktoberfest contest was to create party parrots. So Cult of the Party Parrot has a very easy to use interface, which makes contributing these little parrots really easy. And so finding things like that that are fun and simple is a great first encouragement.
And I just want to make sure that people can hear. She's saying Hacktoberfest. which is going on right now. Oktoberfest is also very fun, but totally different. But so if you Google Hacktoberfest, or if you look on Twitter, you'll find tons of activity. So yeah, that's a great one. Thank you.
Did I say Oktoberfest?
No, you said it right. I just didn't think people who didn't know what you were saying might not have heard you clearly out there, so I repeated it. You said it. No, you were fine. I knew what you meant, but trying to include everybody in the spirit of it, inclusion.
Yeah, and just to build off of what Demetris was mentioning, like finding a mentor who's doing what you want to do, so they understand the dynamics of contributing. The collaboration piece is huge. Like I don't know many developers are working in a silo that's not collaborating with someone at some point. I think that's a big part. We don't know what we don't know, right? So ask somebody who has been down that road.
That's great. Great question. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Melody Greason, she, her pronouns. I'm a senior at NC State, and I want to ask about mentorship. Specifically, I've been a TA at NC State for the past 2 years, and I found those relationships with 1 out of every 20 students who wants to talk more to be extremely fulfilling, and it for them helps to propel their own interests and learn what they want to do. So I want to ask about that in the context of open source. Not a specific question, but do you see that happening? Do you see any opportunities for mentorship? Any positive words about that?
I love this topic, so thank you for bringing it up. That's great. Okay, can I, here, I'm going to answer it real quick, and then I have been in this industry for more than 20 years, and a couple weeks ago, I reached out to someone else at my company and asked them to be my mentor, even though they are very new in open source, because they have skill set that I don't have. And I was very pleased that she said yes, because, so anyway, my advice being, it doesn't matter how old you are or how long you've been doing a thing. It's always a good idea to get a mentor if you can learn from someone, and it's also a great way to meet people.
I mean, for me, my mentorships are a great way for networking because they have inside tracks to other things that I may want to do. But it also gives me an opportunity. It's like if I want to try something different, like even with project management, which is new to me. So I'm talking to someone who has been doing project management for a long time. And she's like, yep, you're good. You're going to learn it. Just keep going forward. I think as kind of like Rikki mentioned, like whatever, if something new you want to do, whether it's school, career, or any other type of side projects, find someone who's been down that road, right? And work with them, get their feedback, listen, take it in, don't take it personal, and use that to find your next best opportunity. Absolutely. And that doesn't end, no matter how long you've been in the business, it doesn't end.
I can't say enough about the power and the value of mentors. Like my mentor, I look forward, we talk about every 3 weeks. I wish I had more time. He's a VP. And I would also say he's sort of like my therapist, because there are times that you just sort of need somebody that you can unload or offload something to and say, check me here, fact check me, keep me honest. Like, how should I be thinking about this? But not only that, while I do think that's extremely important, they are can be that bridge to other people in the organization that you might not have a relationship with. They may be able to share some insights with you that you might not have that can sort of, help you along the way. I would hope that in the open source, community realm as well, that, the communities want to stay viable. They want to bring in new maintainers and contributors. You want to, continue to accelerate the work that you're doing. And I would hope that people are as open and receptive to, bringing in people and being, a mentor or an accountability partner for people that are, interested in collaborating.
I would say about mentoring. Mentoring is critically important, but I found over the years, like the last few years, mentoring has taken on kind of this heaviness. Like I talk to, students and people that are early in their career, and there's like almost this pressure to find the perfect mentor. And it has to be someone that's like up here, they're trying to get where they're trying to go. Mentors I have so many doggone mentors, it's not even funny. Like I find mentors if there's a very specific thing that I want to do, and it might be for a short period of time. It doesn't have to be like, I love your mentor, and I have those too, but it doesn't have to be someone at this very senior level that you meet with and they're your mentor for the next 20 years. And also I have mentors at different levels as well. I have some that are much more junior than me that, I mean, somebody on my team right now, she's my mentor for all things TikTok. Because I was like, I don't know what's happening over there. I don't know what y'all are doing, but I know that's how I have to reach people. So I go get help with that. And there's like a lot of tech things that I always go get, you know, those that are more junior than me. So look up, down, sideways, cross for mentors, and don't let a mentor have to be like the panacea for all things. Like I love what you said around, you know, your mentor is your therapist. I have a therapist, I have a coach, because I like to normalize therapy, so I always make sure I do that. I have a therapist, I have a coach, and I have tons of mentors, internally and externally. So I would say don't look for just that one perfect mentor and you hang your hat on that. Just your mentors are all around you, and so I would just say make sure that you take a very open approach to mentoring.
Yeah, great question. I installed TikTok on Thursday, so we should chat.
I'm not your mentor. Go find a mentor for it.
Anyone else want to address that one? Or?
I mean, they said such great things.
Okay, yeah, that was a really great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't aware there was such an attitude of there has to be one mentor. That's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I have a couple of mentees. I got two young women who started their careers at the very beginning of the pandemic. And so I was like, oh, okay, let me see how I can help you. So I set up, it was weekly on Fridays, and now it's monthly. It's called Mint Tea, and it's an informal online tea. Like I try to reproduce a hallway track where I invite other people to come in on the Zoom, and that way that, they can ask questions from other people, you know, or we could just have a conversation. So that's worked well for us so far. All right. Next question.
Hi, Michael Christensen, they, them. I work at Corning Incorporated. I've had great experiences with D&I groups in corporations and bad experiences. I've struggled to create experiences in other companies. And we hear a lot about this cross-collaboration. I'm wondering if there's a place to find stuff like your mentee or to connect with Red Hat's great groups as a community at a broader scale than just having to be in a company to get that. And I wonder if you guys had any advice on how to build something like that.
That's a great question. And you're already off to the right start by being at an event here in town. So that's one way.
One thing I'll share really quickly, we talk about cross-collaboration. So the build community of which, you know, Koren and I are leaders, over the last couple of years, we have really been working to cultivate strong relationships with other Black ERGs, especially in the Triangle area. So we do have sort of a consortium with Cisco, Lenovo, MetLife. I'm leaving out a couple of them, but Credit Suisse maybe, IBM. And, you know, so I think there's power in that, you know, that cross-functional collaboration that, you know, we can learn from each other. We can share what's working well, what's not so working well. And just, you know, I think going out into to the external community, you know, as a group is an even bigger show of force. Demetris and I have been partnered up a lot lately. You know, Red Hat is one of the founding partners in the All-In program, and we are, you know, so thrilled about that and seeing where that's going to go. So, you know, these opportunities to just create like this macro network that is, you know, transcendent beyond, you know, the walls of the company, as I think where the true, you know, value and power of collaboration lies.
Yeah, I do want to give a shout out to Michael. So Michael used to work at Red Hat and was a volunteer with Build. So thank you, Michael. Good to see you again. As Clarence mentioned, and that I think getting outside the walls of Red Hat is really important because there's other organizations, other communities. I mean, and not so much even corporate communities. There's other nonprofits and organizations that are doing the same type of work. And I think learning from them, connecting with them, partnering with them in different programs is vital. And I think because this is a bigger than one tech company. I think it's a community project, and it will take getting outside of our comfort zone, taking those hard conversations, and working with people who are, you know, sometimes, you know, doing bigger and better things so that we can learn and be better as well.
I mean, when they're talking about it's a community thing, that's what All In is meant to be. It's an open source community. And I remember when we started with All In, and I was just saying, I was like, why can't companies come together and work on this? And when most people think about diversity and inclusion, they think about companies recruiting and hiring folks from underrepresented backgrounds. And I had some people early on that was like, there's no way you're going to get companies to come in and collaborate and share talent. It's just never going to happen. And so when we started this, we were like, okay, if they're not going to share talent, why are they not sharing talent? And what they were saying, or not even sharing talent, but just sharing some of their strategies and programs that are working well. And what the companies were kind of approaching it with was, if I share my amazing DEI program to the world and with you, then you're going to take that program and go after that same talent that we're trying to go after. And we're looking at it as a competitive advantage. And I said, that's such a fixed mindset, and that goes against everything that we stand for in tech and in open source. We're a growth mindset. There's no such thing as a limited talent pool. I was like, we have to grow the pie instead of us trying to fight for a bigger slice of that same pie. And so that's what companies, we really started talking to them at All In, and I'm very proud. I don't want to like steal the thunder from my keynote, but our founding partners now are Red Hat, you have Cisco, Fidelity, GitHub, Microsoft, Intel. And what we're starting to see is them saying, okay, we got these amazing students in this program. If they want to do something that we don't offer in our company, but another company offers them, we're sending them there. We got to make sure that we keep them in open source. And if they don't work for our company, we're going to make sure that we give them what they need to work for someone else's. So that thing that they told us 6 months ago that was impossible to do, it's possible through open source, and we're doing it. So great question.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, hello. My name is Serena. I'm here all the way from Denmark, Aarhus University, the oldest and the largest university there. Well, I'm new into the open source community. Even though I'm aware of it, I recommend it to my engineering students. And I'm here part of my PhD study. My question is related to how communities in open source or companies that work for you and with you are actually innovating. What are the ways that they make use of your resources besides hackathons and student projects? Can we mention a few type of activities or organizations or platforms that are actually leveraging those types of resources that you produce and come up with new ideas, and why not new companies in the future?
Oh my God, no. I was like, can you summarize? I was afraid you were going to ask that. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Definitely. So straightforward, what are the ways that in the open source community, participants and members come up with new ideas? Hackathons, I know, are one of those, right? But
so, or not necessarily come up with new ideas, but create solutions to problems. Is that
exactly.
Okay?
Enter new projects.
Okay.
I'll take a stab at this, and you let me know if I'm not answering your question, but I think that's the value of open source, right? If you have an idea, if you have something you want to work on, you go out and find a community that's already working on it, and if they're not, you start one. It's as easy as setting up a, shameless plug, GitHub profile, right? And then just start a new project up there, and then you start growing your community. And so I think that's probably the lowest barrier to entry for what you're talking about. If you have an idea or something you want to work on, you go and find that community, or if you don't find it, you create one. As far as companies are concerned, I think, there's just so much innovation that's happening. A lot of it we've already mentioned today, right? Around looking to expand the talent pool, or for looking at, backgrounds that aren't typically represented, or those that are non-traditional. So they're being very innovative in that point. And I think a lot of companies over the last couple of years, they had a reckoning to saying that what we're doing isn't working, and we got to do this differently. And so I like to talk about GitHub and even their strategy. We have our strategy aligned across 4 pillars. People, which is HR, that's usually where a lot of DEI efforts are centered for companies. But they said it's more than our people. It's also our platform. It's our policy efforts. It's also our philanthropy or our social impact efforts. So we've now embedded diversity and inclusion across our entire business strategy, not just HR, And I think you're starting to see a lot more companies doing that. So it's coming in your marketing, your products, it's everything. So I think that's a way that might feel like a no-brainer, but it's actually innovative and starting to be very new and starting to pick up some steam.
We're running low on time, so do you want to go ahead and answer if you have an answer, and then we'll squeeze in one more question. And
I was just going to say really quick, Red Hat has an open source program office, and they are very, very geared towards that community engagement and figure out ways to partner the resources and the scale that Red Hat has with that passion, that innovation, within the community. And we're so thankful for having those community relationships to continue to build upon, the work that we're doing with RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and OpenShift, and all of our, products and solutions. That many times those solutions that make it into a new release are based on an idea from someone in the community, and then it catches steam, and someone from Red Hat takes it and says, we're going to harden it and strengthen it and make it better. So I think the program office and then just cultivating that relationship with those people is key to how that innovation works.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take one more question, and then I think we'll have Todd in here hopefully soon.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Christina, and I was in the business for 14 to 16 years already. And I was inspired with your talk a while ago about it came from accounting, but you're working in a technology company. And I was part of the Scholar when I was in college, and I had an opportunity to work with a prestige company in the Philippines. So my question is, how do you encourage young people or people from poverty places to learn open source? Now that we are talking about diversity, inclusion, right? For African American, how about for Asian people that they wanted to learn, but they don't have any idea about open source? It's really hard to see, if you're talking to people who lives in the provinces that they don't really know about internet or whatsoever. We as a technologist, how do we encourage those people that they're poor in education, but we wanted them to learn about open source? Because I know there's a lot of people out there that they are interested to learn, but they don't have an opportunity or they don't have the ability to help themselves.
Okay, great question. Thank you. I'll try to summarize there. She's asking, how do you encourage people to get into open source if they're in areas that might have less access to some technology and infrastructure? Is that what you're asking? Okay, great question. That's a big topic. Yeah.
I'll lead off. I want to hear whatever. Let me start. One is, I think, dealing with the awareness problem or awareness opportunity that open source exists, that there's so much wonderful, innovation that's happening there that you want people to, be able to take advantage of. And companies want people to be able to come in and participate in open source as well. I think we talked about it a little bit. There's a knowledge gap there that I personally would love to see solved, at historically black colleges and universities and anywhere that doesn't know about the power and the wonderful things that, can come from open source and open source principles. So I don't know if that's cultivating better relationships on college campuses to, ingest and, input open source into, curriculum. So that people are just more aware of it and learning it from the ground up. But then I guess it's just also, awareness, in the tech, ecosystem about, what is necessary to bring more people into open source. The last thing I was going to say is tying it back to D&I, which is if you're the type of person that is motivated by the opportunity to do something that people who don't look like you have done, and be one of those first people to be a founder, to start a community and do something special, then that can be, really appealing value proposition to you. And that's how I would position it with, some young students. If I had the opportunity, you be the first.
You be the first one. You may come up with this next big idea, and then have, your name, plastered on Wikipedia or somewhere else as found in this next big idea that maybe had led to something, really great in the future of tech.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, as Clarence mentioned, I don't want to put all the premise, all this focus on a company having to do something for a community. I think it can start with you. It can start, teach a child, expose them to open source, to coding. That was one thing that, when I was growing up, was that I was exposed to computers at a very early age, and I see the value in that. So Build is one thing that we have done is reach out to community centers for underprivileged youth to expose them to the possibilities. I think it's just an engagement. Show them how to code. We use a coding program called Scratch, and we taught a class. Now, I hope that those children are still using that in some way, but I think it definitely starts with being exposed at a young age to kind of get them interested in the possibilities. But it does start with, we saw a need, and we said, hey, we're going to do this. We didn't wait for Red Hat or some company to give us a bunch of money and say, hey, okay, now do this program. It was something very simple, and I think it can start with you.
I'll just add, what you all are talking about is like you can't be what you can't see, right? Like you have to make sure that people have exposure to folks that are successful in open source, participating in open source that looks like them. But to take it a step further, not only giving them that exposure, but you also have to figure out and make sure that they have access. The digital divide is still real across this entire world. There are still people that are living within like 100-mile radius of even here where we are today that cannot get on the internet. Like it's impossible for them. So to tell them to go take a coding class or there's all these free resources, but they don't have the infrastructure they need to get there, you have to make sure you're thinking about that as well. I think there's this, a saying that says, how can you tell someone to pull themselves up out of their bootstraps if they're not wearing any boots? So you got to make sure that we're looking at this holistically because there's so many different barriers to entry and access for folks, especially from underrepresented groups, marginalized communities, and regions around the world.
Really great question. Thank you. Great answers. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have now, so I will let Todd come up here to help close us out before we go to our social and socialize outside on this gorgeous day in North Carolina. Thank you all very much for participating, and I will talk to you at the social.